and infrastructure to order. Pursuant to Committee Rule 6F and House Rule 11, Clause 2H out, the chairman may postpone further proceedings today on any question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment in which a recorded vote of the yeas and nays are ordered. I'd ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare recess at any time during today's meeting, and without objection, that is so ordered. All roster text has been distributed electronically, and paper copies are also available here in the hearing room. Today, the committee is considering one order of business, which is the approval of the revised subcommittee roster due to membership changes on the majority side. So I call up the subcommittee roster for consideration without objection. The roster will be considered as read, and I'd recognize myself for a quick statement. Pursuant to House Resolution 300, Congressman Jimmy Patronis was appointed to the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. The revised roster simply reflects the addition of Congressman Patroni of Florida's 1st District to 3 subcommittees, which are the Subcommittee on Aviation, the Subcommittee on Coast Guard and the Maritime Transportation, and the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment. Before coming to Congress, Representative Patroni held several positions, including State Fire Marshal, Florida's Chief Financial Officer, and was also a member of Florida's House of Representatives. This Congress, the T&I Committee has a very aggressive agenda, and we're going to advance legislation to reauthorize our nation's surface transportation programs, authorize the United States Coast Guard, improve America's water resources infrastructure, and implement the necessary reforms to ensure aviation safety, and many more things. Congressman Patroni, I welcome your input. As we work on these major pieces of legislation, we look forward to your contributions now that you've joined the committee and completed the final roster. Do any other members wish to be recognized for a statement on subcommittee? Mr. Patroni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking forward to join the team and be a team player.
Absolutely. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'd ask unanimous consent for the approval of revised subcommittee roster due to membership changes on the majority side. Without objection, that is so ordered, and the revised subcommittee roster is approved. Pursuant to Rule 6F of the Rules of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, the chairman notes the presence of a quorum for actions taken on all subcommittee or on all committee business today, and without objection, that is so ordered. I'd ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make all necessary technical, clarifying, conforming changes to each of the items adopted today to reflect the actions of the committee, and without objection, that is so ordered. We have completed the full committee's business for the day. However, I'd like to note that the Subcommittee on Highway and Transit has a hearing immediately following our conclusion here today. And with that, the committee stands adjourned.
The Subcommittee on Highways and Transit will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit on the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Today's hearing focuses on the importance of long-term certainty and stability for the Highway Trust Fund. This timely discussion is part of a series of subcommittee hearings as we work to develop and enact an on-time, multi-year surface bill. Congress created the Highway Trust Fund in 1956 to provide a dedicated federal revenue source based on a user-pays model for the construction of the interstate highway system. Congress began with a 3 cents per gallon excise tax on gasoline allocated to the trust fund. Currently, the Highway Trust Fund is funded by excise taxes on gas and diesel fuels, as well as taxes on truck tires, truck and trailer sales, and heavy vehicle users, with the most recent adjustment to the tax on gas and diesel fuels in 1993. Since 2001, spending from the Highway Trust Fund has exceeded its revenues. During the most recent fiscal year, the Highway Trust Fund collected nearly $50 billion in revenues and interest, but spent $70.6 billion, a deficit of more than $20 billion, which is a pretty significant gap. To ensure the trust fund's continued solvency, Congress has transferred a total of $275 billion from the Treasury's General Fund to the Highway Trust Fund since 2008. Without a serious solution, our state, local, and private sector partners risk losing a reliable funding source critical to project delivery and our national economy. While general fund bailouts have offered short-term relief at the expense of the individual American taxpayer, they do not address the long-term challenges that plague the Highway Trust Fund. The last several surface transportation authorization bills have continued to authorize highway and mass transit authorizations beyond what the Highway Trust Fund can reasonably support. The current Surface Transportation Law, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, increased Highway Trust Fund spending by more than 36%, but made no reforms to revenue streams, resulting in a $118 billion general fund transfer to cover that gap. Now, there are a number of different thoughts about how to address the fundamental structural challenges of the current funding mechanism to fund the Highway Trust Fund, and all have their pros and cons. Meanwhile, gasoline and diesel taxes, which have remained unchanged since 1993, have lost 73% of their purchasing power. If Congress had chosen to index the gas and diesel taxes to inflation back in 1993, an additional $480 billion in federal revenues would have been raised, most of which would have been deposited into the Highway Trust Fund. Obviously, gas tax revenue will continue to decline as cars become more fuel efficient. Electric vehicles require no fuel and therefore obviously are not paying into the Highway Trust Fund. CBO estimates gas tax revenues, the majority of the trust fund receipts, will decline by nearly 40% over the next decade. Fortunately, this committee is intent on addressing this shortfall in a fair and equitable manner. Through reconciliation, this committee will propose a $200 annual registration fee on electric vehicles at the federal level, which will raise tens of billions of dollars in additional revenue for the Highway Trust Fund over the next decade to better ensure that all users of our roads are paying to maintain those roads. While a step in the right direction and the first real attempt by Congress to address the trust fund solvency problems in more than 30 years, this fee alone, of course, will certainly not solve the estimated $142 billion shortfall. Given that backdrop, we look forward to hearing from our witnesses on potential solutions and new innovative methods we might employ to fund our surface transportation programs. And so therefore, I thank each of you for being here today. I now recognize our ranking member for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Ms. Norton.
Thank you. I want to thank Subcommittee Chairman Rouser for holding this hearing. The Highway Trust Fund guarantees predictable funding to state and local partners, empowering communities to build the infrastructure they need. However, since 2008, trust fund spending has outpaced revenue, a trend that is projected to exhaust the trust fund by 2028. Therefore, Congress must find a sustainable solution to ensure the solvency of the trust fund. To date, Congress has transferred $275 billion from the general fund to the Highway Trust Fund, including $118 billion in Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act. This infusion of funds enabled critical investments in roadway, bridge, and freight infrastructure, roadway safety upgrades, and transit network expansions. Without the general fund transfers, these and many other priorities would have been sidelined. Supplementing the Highway Trust Fund revenue with general fund transfers has been necessary because Congress has not raised the gas tax in over 30 years, which has eroded its purchasing power. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act supported several pilot projects to study other funding options, such as a road user charge that would levy a fee on miles driven rather than gallons of fuel consumed. Congress should consider the full menu of options to ensure the solvency of the Highway Trust Fund, including a national road user charge. Whatever Congress decides, the solution must meet several criteria. First, we need to provide a sustainable revenue source for the Highway Trust Fund that allows this committee to continue to enact multi-year surface transportation bills. Second, we must retain and strengthen the mass transit account for the Highway Trust Fund. Transit, which is an essential part of our transportation system, improves mobility, reduces pollution, reduces congestion for drivers, and supports millions of private sector jobs. Eliminating the mass transit account, a proposal Congress hears periodically, would not make up for the Highway Trust Fund's shortfall. According to Jeff Dazis, one of our witnesses, the Highway Trust Fund will face an annual $40 billion gap between revenue and spending by 2027. Transit spending will account for only $17 billion, or less than half of the shortfall. Congress must reject any attempts to eliminate the mass transit account, which would hurt people, our economy, and our environment without solving the problem. Third, we need to direct more Highway Trust Fund resources to places that need the most. Local roads are what I mean. According to research by the Brookings Institution, local roads are entitled to a much larger share of federal resources than they receive, and they tend to be in much worse condition than state roads. There are several paths that Congress may choose to take that would guarantee reliable funding, maintain the mass transit account, and direct more resources to local partners. I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Graves, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Rouser, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today as we discuss the importance of long-term certainty and stability in the Highway Trust Fund. The trust fund is facing an insolvency crisis dating back to at least 2008, as current user fees are no longer sufficient to sustain necessary investment in our surface transportation needs. The Infrastructure Investment Act, or IIJA, failed to address the issue, and it only made matters worse by increasing spending from the Highway Trust Fund by $102 billion and relying on a bailout of the trust fund with $118 billion from a general fund transfer. So let me be clear. Republicans support investing in infrastructure, but our highway funding system is founded upon the principle that roadway users must pay for their use of the system. And failing to restructure our surface transportation funding sources is going to have severe consequences for our nation, transportation system, and the American people. That is why tomorrow, as part of the reconciliation package that we're going to be working on, the committee will take the first steps towards Highway Trust Fund solvency and stability. We will vote on a proposal to leverage existing state vehicle registration systems and address and assess a new fee of $200, as was pointed out, on electric vehicles, $100 on hybrid vehicles, and $20 fee on most other passenger vehicles. If successful, this new user fee would represent the first new funding stream into the Highway Trust Fund in more than 30 years. Nearly 40 states already have a special registration fee for EVs, and it's time for the federal government to assess a fee on EVs that for years have not paid any gasoline or diesel taxes, which is obviously the primary source of the Highway Trust Fund revenues at this point. Most importantly, this proposal continues the user fee principle and ensures EVs no longer get a free ride on our highways. While EVs and hybrids will start paying these fees into the system in the near term, the $20 fee will not go into effect until 2031. This delay gives the committee the opportunity to consider restructuring the broken trust fund tax structure with a fairer system to ensure solvency for many years to come. And let me close by once again underscoring the significance of this proposal. The trust fund is broken. Our reconciliation bill will take the first steps towards fixing it by unlocking the path towards permanently addressing the trust fund issue. And this gives our committee a significant head start in our reauthorization process and sets us up for success. We have to act now to save the trust fund before it's too late. And with that, Chairman Rouser, I appreciate the opportunity, and I yield back.
Ranking Member Larson has yielded back, so we'll now go to introduction of the witnesses. Mr. Kennedy, I understand that you have a witness that you'd like to introduce.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Rouser and Graves, and to the ranking member, Madam Norton. I am grateful to introduce Mr. Carlos Braceras, somebody who I've known for 10 years. And as a state legislator, he's an outstanding resource, and on the federal level, we're going to have a great experience being able to have him here. He brings a wealth of leadership and expertise to today's discussion. He has dedicated 38 years of his service, even though he looks like he's 20 years old. He's been actually working for Utah State Department of Transportation for 38 years, where he served as executive director since 2013. He's been a national leader in transportation innovation and currently chairs the AASHTO Agency Administration Managing Committee, and has also been recently appointed to be the chair of the Federal System Funding Alternative Advisory Board. I had the privilege of working with Mr. Braceras in the state legislature to pass legislation that launched Utah's statewide road usage charge program. Thanks to his leadership, Utah now has one of the first and largest RUC programs in the country for alternative fuel vehicles. Mr. Braceras has consistently demonstrated innovative leadership, helping Utah become a national model for transportation planning and project delivery. I look forward to engaging with him and our other distinguished witnesses during today's hearing, and thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, I yield back.
We also have with us Ty Johnson, who's testifying on behalf of the National Asphalt Pavement Association and also Great North Carolina. Great to have you here. Jeff Davis, representing the Eno Center for Transportation. Brian Burkhard, representing Jacobs. And Udi Tomer, representing Brookings Metro. I particularly thank each of you for being here and look forward to your great insights. Briefly, I'd like to take a moment and explain our lighting system. It's pretty self-explanatory. There are 3 lights in front of you. Green means go, yellow means red is soon to come, and red means close it up just as quickly as you can if you haven't already. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. So as your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Mr. Braceras, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair Rouser, Ranking Member Norton, members of the subcommittee, good morning and thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Carlos Braceras. I'm the Executive Director of the Utah Department of Transportation, and I'm a past president of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. I'm honored to share the perspective of state departments of transportation nationwide, along with some insights from Utah. Transportation is the backbone of America's quality of life and its economy. Every school bus route, every emergency response, every product on our store shelves begins with a safe, reliable trip on our roads and bridges. When transportation works, people barely notice it. When it fails, communities and commerce grind to a halt. We must recognize that the system is truly a nationwide network. When transportation is successful in Utah, we contribute to the success of North Carolina. Likewise, transportation challenges in Utah negatively impact states on the other side of the country. The Highway Trust Fund is vital to building and maintaining a strong, effective transportation network. Let me give you one specific example. Using the bridge formula funds from the IIJA, Utah identified 90 bridges that were in need of work. 76 of them were owned by rural communities off the state system. By the end of the current program, every one of those bridges that had been in poor condition will have been repaired or replaced. This results in better safety and mobility for users of the system and lifts the burden from local governments whose budgets are overstretched. This bridge formula program is an example of how formula funding allows states to plan strategically and to effectively deliver the priorities that are most important to our state and local communities. The important benefits of an effective transportation system now face a critical risk. The Highway Trust Fund is deteriorating. Since 2008, the Highway Trust Fund has spent more than it collects because the primary revenue source, a per-gallon fuel tax that is not indexed for inflation, shrinks as vehicles become more efficient, consuming less fuel or no fuel at all, and inflation continues to erode the purchasing power. Absent congressional action, we will face a shortfall of roughly $20 billion next year. States will be forced to delay projects, contractors will pull back, and costs will rise, undermining the very efficiency that taxpayers expect. To avoid that outcome, we need a long-term reauthorization that does 2 things. First, it must extend the current IIJA investment levels and at least keep pace with inflation, so state DOTs can plan and deliver projects with confidence. Second, it must modernize how we pay for the system, because a 21st century network cannot run on a 20th century revenue model. The principles that have served this country for nearly 100 years is a user pay approach. Simply put, those who use the transportation system help pay for it. In Utah, we put that philosophy into practice with the nation's first statewide operational road usage charge program. We have learned valuable lessons for how to address concerns about fairness, privacy, freedom of choice, and cost to administer. Our experience in Utah demonstrates that it's possible to effectively address challenges and concerns associated with a road usage charge model, and we believe solutions can be implemented nationwide. We recognize that a mileage-based user fee is not a silver bullet, but Utah's experience shows that it can be part of a diversified toolbox that also includes inflation index fuel tax, while the fleet continues to rely on gasoline and diesel, targeted fees, and yes, general fund contributions. Members of the subcommittee, transportation is essential for our extraordinary economy and quality of life in America. States need the certainty and the resources to build a safer, more resilient, and more innovative transportation future. A timely, long-term, fully funded reauthorization will let every state, urban, suburban, and rural, deliver the projects our citizens expect and deserve. On behalf of Utah and my colleagues in all 50 states, thank you for your leadership and for the chance to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Johnson.
Good morning, Full Transportation and Infrastructure Committee Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson, Highway and Transit Subcommittee Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the Highway Trust Fund and the vital role it plays in securing the future of our national surface transportation system. My name is Ty Johnson. I'm proud to serve as president of Fred Smith Company, a Raleigh-based heavy highway construction company employing over 1,200 dedicated men and women throughout North Carolina. Our company builds roads and bridges, manufactures asphalt, and has proudly contributed to the infrastructure that keeps our communities connected for nearly 100 years. I'm a lifelong North Carolinian, born in Durham and educated at NC State University, where I earned a degree in civil engineering. I've spent my entire 30-year career in the heavy highway industry, serving in many positions at our company. Today, I'm honored to speak not only for Fred Smith Company, but also on behalf of the 1,100 member companies of the National Asphalt Paving Association, the only national trade association exclusively representing the asphalt paving industry for the past 70 years. Our members are in every state and operate in every congressional district. The asphalt pavements we provide cover over 94% of the entire national roadway market, and our industry is ubiquitous with any policies focused on highway funding, expansion, and maintenance. However, we cannot talk about America's infrastructure future without first talking about the solvency of the Highway Trust Fund. My hope is to provide this committee on the HTF's real-world impacts on contractors and material providers, like Fred Smith Company and others in the asphalt industry, who work with state DOTs and HTF-backed projects every day throughout the country. I believe 4 clear user fee pathways must be considered for HTF solvency, and while NAPA is agnostic on any one option we must pursue, these 4 would certainly make major financial strides. One option is to immediately index and raise the gas tax, which hasn't occurred since 1993. Another is to capture all users of the national roadway system within the HTF, explicitly EV and any hybrid drivetrains that pay little to no funds into the HTF currently. Additionally, you could implement a national vehicle miles traveled program that would provide an equitable capture of the roads we use and frequency, which can be deployed without privacy concerns and could implement various collection mechanisms. Lastly, a national fee on gross vehicle weight restrictions would capture any vehicle on our roadways and tier a vehicle's fee based off its weight and thus its literal impact on our national roadway network. Each of these options has merit, and together, implemented in some capacity or in tandem, offer a pathway to sustainable long-term funding. In North Carolina, we understand the stakes. Our state maintains more roads than nearly any other, over 80,000 miles of highway and 13,500 bridges. In 2023 alone, North Carolina received $1.6 billion in federal funds from the HTF to support critical projects like the widening of I-95 and improvements to I-85 and I-77 in Charlotte. Every $1 billion in infrastructure investment supports approximately 13,000 American jobs. At Fred Smith Company and across the entire asphalt industry, we provide good-paying careers that support families and communities. But without reliable HTF funding, that workforce we proudly employ and the projects they deliver are at risk. But we're doing what we can to help. The asphalt industry is stretching every federal dollar, given asphalt is America's most recycled material. Every year, over 90 million tons of reclaimed asphalt pavement are reused, saving state DOTs more than $3 billion annually. With the right policies and incentives, we can further expand this cost-saving practice and deliver greater value for every taxpayer dollar without sacrificing pavement performance. But it's not just how we support the HTF with new user fees, it's what HTF resources mean for the safety of our employees. As you know, last week was National Work Zone Awareness Week, a sobering reminder that more than 100 road workers lose their lives annually in work zones. HTF programs like the Work Zone Safety Contingency Fund support technologies and strategies that keep our workers and the traveling public safe. Members of the committee, the Highway Trust Fund is not just a financial mechanism. It is the backbone of our nation's surface transportation network. The current user fee system is unsustainable, but the solutions are within reach and the choices are real. On behalf of Fred Smith Company and the members of NAPA, we are eager to partner with you in shaping a bold, bipartisan reauthorization package that financially secures the HTF and positions our country for decades of economic growth and mobility. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I look forward to your questions and to supporting your work in ensuring the financial future of our national surface transportation network.
Mr. Davis, you're recognized.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Members Norton and Larson, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jeff Davis. I'm a senior fellow at the Eno Center for Transportation, a nonpartisan think tank founded by traffic pioneer William Phelps Eno in 1921 to carry on his work increasing the safety and flow rate of vehicular traffic. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that now studies all modes of transportation up and down the Federalist chain of government. Established in 1956, the Highway Trust Fund is part of the user pay, user benefit tax principle. Simply put, the federal budget is kept in two separate books. All spending accounts are kept in one book. All receipt accounts are kept in a separate book. The sum totals of the two books get compared to determine the federal deficit or surplus. A federal trust fund account is a bridge between the two books, a way of linking receipt accounts from specific taxes on certain groups with spending accounts that benefit those groups over a long period of years. It's a visibility exercise, not a fiduciary relationship. Simply put, the first 50 years of the Highway Trust Fund worked well. It raised $676 billion in taxes on highway users and spent the same amount, plus $7 billion in interest, building the interstate system and meeting other road, bridge, and transit needs. Since 2007, however, things have been out of balance. Spending was 28% higher than tax receipts, necessitating $275 billion in bailout transfers, almost all from the general fund. This happened for three reasons: a slowdown in the rate at which total driving increased year to year, a slow increase in automotive fuel efficiency, and a political system that keeps increasing trust fund spending each year without regards to revenue levels. The problem on the spending side has been more acute lately since the enactment of the bipartisan infrastructure law. Trust fund tax receipts in 2024 were almost $1 billion less than 3 years prior, while trust fund spending increased by $17 billion over that same period. In the future, things get worse, as Chart 1 from my testimony will show. This shows the columns, the vertical columns are tax revenues for the trust fund, and then the green ones on top are the general fund bailouts in the year they get spent, and then the red line is spending. You can see that CBO projections at the current rates and spending levels, the trust fund will run out of money again in mid-2028, and after that, the immediate revenue gap will be around $40 billion a year, rising to $50 billion a year by 2035, or $340 billion over that period cumulative. Put another way, only 60 cents out of every dollar paid out of the trust fund last year came from highway user taxes. The rest came from some other kind of general fund subsidy or transfer. In about 2030 or 2031, we fall below the 50% mark, 50 cents on the dollar. And by 2035, CBO says trust fund taxes will only support 43 cents out of every dollar of outlays. Now, make no mistake, the trust fund didn't go broke because of electric vehicles, but the rate of EV adoption controls the rate at which motor fuel tax receipts will continue to decline in the future. If Congress decides they want to continue the user pay system, and they should consider that question, revenues and spending need to be aligned. At present, 3 of the 5 highway trust fund excise taxes tax the extent of highway system use. Gasoline, diesel, and heavy truck tires are all proxies for road mileage. The other 2 taxes on trucks don't measure the extent of road use, the 12% sales tax and the heavy vehicle use tax annually. They're more system access charges. So in terms of taxes that measure road usage, so far doesn't appear to be the willingness in the political system to increase motor fuel taxes. And while Congress has encouraged research into a national mileage fee, the implementation costs and complexity of such a fee probably mean that it wouldn't be practical to get it done in time for the next reauthorization bill. That leaves taxing road access, the potential for road use, instead of the extent of actual road use. The committee apparently released this morning a national vehicles registration fee proposal it'll consider tomorrow, focused on first electric vehicles and hybrids and eventually expanding to all motor vehicles. Although such fees do not fully measure system use, they are as consistent with the user pay system as either of the two current truck taxes are. But again, remember how big the problem is. We're only 60% self-sufficient right now, dropping below 50% in 2030 or 31. In terms of dollars, just remember one figure, 42 to 43 billion a year in revenue at most forever versus 80-some billion dollars in receipts by the time the IIJ is, in spending by the time the IIJ is done. You've either got to bring the 41 or 42 billion line up or the $80 billion line down or some combination. And that means that you got to double revenues or else cut spending by the end of this bill. My back of the envelope calculations say that the EV fee, while it is significant, wouldn't come close to actually closing the amount of revenue that you need to get another 5-year bill. This concludes my testimony. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Burkhardt.
Good morning, Chairman Graves and Rouser, Ranking Members Larson, Holmes, Norton, and members of the Subcommittee on Highway and Transit. My name is Brian Burkhardt. I am Vice President and Global Principal for Advanced Mobility Systems at Jacobs. I appreciate this opportunity to testify today as you examine the need for a long-term solution for the Highway Trust Fund. We like to say at Jacobs that we're challenging today to reinvent tomorrow by solving the world's most critical problems, and helping communities solve their infrastructure challenges has never been more complex. As one of America's leading consulting and advisory firms, Jacobs delivers infrastructure projects that enhance mobility and efficiency across all modes of transportation, and much of this work is supported by the Highway Trust Fund. Nearly every project I've worked on in my career has been made possible by the Highway Trust Fund. These are projects that keep our transportation systems reliable, safe, and resilient. Moreover, because of the improvements and efficiencies they realize for goods movement and mobility, they drive the American economy forward. The Highway Trust Fund represents a founding principle that has formed the basis of the federal transportation policy for over half a century, the user pays, user benefits principle. But the Highway Trust Fund continues to be in trouble. And our current path is uncertain unless we address the fund's long-term structural issues. Fortunately, there are several alternatives to relying on a fuel tax to fund our transportation infrastructure needs. These include an EV fee and a mileage-based user fee or road user charge. First, an EV fee could be a short-term stopgap measure to reduce the fuel tax deficit caused by EVs. Nearly 40 states have adopted EV fees, usually in the form of an annual fee paid during vehicle registration. Some states have implemented additional fees based on vehicle weight or have instituted fees on public EV charging stations. However, EV fees should not be viewed as a panacea to the fund's problem. Rather, they should be considered in parallel with a longer-term fix to the gas tax. Additionally, these one-time or annual payments are not precise assessments on transportation usage, and they do not align with the continued impact that a vehicle imposes on the system. As stated in the National Surface Transportation Infrastructure Financing Commission's report in 2009, required by SafetyLoo, the most viable approach to efficiently fund investment in surface transportation in the medium and long run will be a user charge system based more directly on miles driven rather than indirectly on fuel consumed. Congress has helped states and interstate organizations test the feasibility of mileage-based user fees, but now national leadership is critical, and the US DOT should move forward on the national pilot as defined and required by the IIJA. Full federal implementation of a mileage-based user fee pilot program must be accompanied by a robust education campaign to ensure drivers understand how the program works, the positive impact on rural communities, and the opportunities for privacy protections. Moving to a true transportation usage-based system is imperative in the long run. Lastly, the role of private financing in P3s has grown in interest in helping to close the gap between limited public funding and our growing needs. P3s have been used for centuries across the world and are becoming more prominent in the US thanks to federal financing programs such as the tax-exempt private activity bonds and low-interest rate TIFIA loans. P3s can accelerate project delivery and encourage cost-saving innovation, but they're not suitable for all project types, particularly those without sustainable funding sources. Encouraging private sector participation, ideation, and efficiency is good for infrastructure, and we urge this committee to make these financing programs more accessible so states and localities can accelerate project delivery. This committee knows all too well that our infrastructure funding gap has continued to grow, and we encourage continued collaboration to ensure that the federal government remains a committed partner in funding our transportation infrastructure. Ensuring the solvency of the Highway Trust Fund while adhering to the user pays principle is essential for continued economic growth and is needed to improve the safety of our nation's transportation systems. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Tomer.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the Subcommittee on Highways and Transit, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Adi Tomer. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution here in Washington, D.C. I want to start by noting that my remarks today, plus my written testimony, strictly represent my personal views and do not in any way reflect the views of the Brookings Institution, its other scholars, employees, officers, or trustees. This hearing comes at an opportune time. The Highway Trust Fund is one of the most powerful fiscal instruments in your investment toolbox. Its unique design allows lawmakers to approach investment through multi-year cycles, the same approach used by the state and local owners of our surface transportation network. The trust fund delivers not just funds, but certainty. And the net effect has been a transformation in how people and goods move across America. Said plainly, the trust fund itself is a national asset. Still, the trust fund is just a tool. It doesn't differentiate between where gasoline and diesel were consumed. The trust fund isn't codified to advance any specific economic competitiveness goals you may have. It's only there to support the execution on your congressionally programmed priorities. This next reauthorization presents another opportunity to adopt investment policies that will promote economic competitiveness for generations to come. The Highway Trust Fund will continue to be a powerful tool to achieve that overarching objective, especially if it's coupled with targeted improvements to what it funds and how it distributes that funding. I have 3 high-level recommendations to that end. First, it's vital to keep investing more in the network. We've spent generations building out all our roads and rails, and the roadways alone are now worth over $5 trillion, according to the BEA. All those facilities interweave to move over 1 billion person trips and over 55 million tons of freight every day. It's in our best interest to keep maintaining and modernizing that network. Yet Congress is actually falling short of its past commitments. Even with the IIJA money now coursing through the system, the share of GDP that Congress spends on highways and transit is below the average from 1991 to 2023, and it'd look even worse if we went back to 1956. Not only is spending falling behind, but significant inflation within the construction industry means we've lost purchasing power too. This is a missed opportunity. Per CBO's own research, when federal grants increase, state and local governments actually spend more on surface transportation infrastructure too. Second, it's critical to rethink where and in what the federal government invests. Multiple sections in chapters 23 and 49 of the US Code have enshrined national goals for the country's surface transportation network, including promoting system reliability, improving safety, supporting regional economic development, and reducing project delays. Multiple of those areas deserve extra attention, including our persistently bad safety record and how federal compliance impacts project delivery timelines. But I want to call particular focus today to our local roadway network. Per our recent research at Brookings, 49% of locally owned principal arterials, again, these are main roadways, are in poor condition, compared to 7% of mileage on similar state-owned roads. One of the likely causes is fiscal extraction. Even though locally owned roads carry 34% of all VMT in the country, a relative proxy for many of the trust fund's revenues, current rules apportion all of their gas tax receipts to states. This annual subsidy is hurting system reliability and limiting economic development, but more direct regional funding could address it. Finally, your consideration of new revenues. The United States is incredibly fortunate to have the fiscal capacity to invest at the scale we need and to have access to a range of instruments to reach our spending targets. Just as importantly, the menu of policy responses is well established and thoroughly researched. Vehicle registration fees, road user charges, and private financing instruments are all viable options alongside established alternatives such as increasing gas taxes or transferring general fund revenues. The challenge is building consensus and selecting fiscal instruments that match your goals. I recommend Congress set up a bipartisan working group to pool your published knowledge and then use that working group to address thorny questions like tax incidents, compliance costs, and spending timelines. To conclude, the trust fund is well suited to channel investment dollars, yet it would be a wasted opportunity if Congress did not couple considerations of new revenue with efforts to rethink how the country measures need, who controls the funding, and the process by which funding recipients comply with federal rules. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Well, thank each of you very much. We'll now turn to questions from the panel. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. I'll start with Mr. Johnson. It was great to be with you back home in North Carolina when we went and toured the project you're working on there on I-95. And by the way, I think we've been working on I-95 since I was born. But in any event, talk to us a little bit about the importance of trust fund solvency in terms of timelines and sustainability, just the importance of keeping projects on task.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Rouser, for that question. Also for your time and coming to visit with us and tour our plant and see our paving operations on 95. It was a privilege to be able to do that. So my two biggest concerns as president of Fred Smith Company are the safety of our employees and to make sure that we have enough work for all of our employees. The Highway Trust Fund in North Carolina provides about 25% of the funds needed to fund the DOT road program. So that 25% is very critical to our company and to our employees. The highway industry in North Carolina is sized, the number of employees we have and the equipment and resources we have is sized to maintain a certain dollar amount spent for the highway program. And if the funds were to be reduced and the amount of money coming in and available were to be reduced, that would severely impact our industry. That would mean that we could potentially have layoffs and reduction in workforce, which would be devastating to our company and our communities. Also, knowing that money is there and it's consistent and it's sufficient and we know it's coming allows us to invest in our company and invest in our communities, whether that be installing, putting up new asphalt plants, or buying more equipment, or expanding our offices, hiring more employees, be willing to train our employees. Knowing that the money is available and it's coming and it's dedicated is critical for us to make those decisions. The work we do is extremely expensive. The equipment and the materials that we buy cost a lot of money, and with any uncertainty if that work will be there to put that equipment and those people to work, it makes us question whether we want to grow and expand in our communities. So in addition to those, the long-term effects, if we do have a slowdown and the workforce shrinks, then when the work does come around, if there is more work that comes later, then it's going to cost more, it's going to take longer because the workforce is going to be smaller. It's just supply and demand. If there's more work and we have fewer people, then it's going to cost more, and the project's going to be delayed. And that's just talking about our company. When you're looking at what it means to our communities and the traveling public, without having that funding to be able to keep up with the demands in our state, whether it be people who live in our state or people who just transit through our state, it just really impacts the mobility, the ride quality. We can't maintain roads. So just having the Highway Trust Fund solvent, knowing that it is there and that our DOT can plan out the work and know that the funds will be available when the time comes to build it, that we can count on those jobs being there and the opportunities are there. This means so much for our planning of our resources and our labor force that with that, when there's doubt with our state or with our employer or our company, it just makes it challenging to grow and to invest. So just the renewal of the Highway Trust Fund is just critical to our employees and our communities.
Thank you very much. You covered it well. Mr. Braceras, let me ask you, Utah is a growing state, North Carolina is a growing state. How have you traversed the pitfalls, all the pros and cons of addressing your issues there?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, growth is so exciting, but it's also one of the biggest concerns our citizens have, the rate of growth. And Utah's we like to say we're unique, and some people might roll your eyes at that, but we are a very urban state, believe it or not. We're the 7th most urbanized state in the country because 65% of the land in Utah is owned by the federal government. So we have amazingly beautiful places to go recreate in, but our growth is all concentrated on basically what we call the Wasatch Front. And what we're seeing with that explosive growth is a concern both from, the quality of life that everybody's experiencing, and congestion has been one of their rising concerns. So the ability to plan and get projects ready to go is really critical, and that's, I think, what Mr. Johnson was talking about. All states have a 5-year plan of projects because it takes a long time to deliver those projects. We know for every section of road, we have a plan for every section of road, of pavement in our state, every bridge in the state. And if we can deliver those projects when it's needed most, we follow the deterioration curve of a pavement and we say, you know what, we can make an investment, a lower cost investment at the right time, and we can stretch out the life of that roadway. So if we can
I'll need to shut you down there. I don't want to go too far over time since I'm chairman and have to keep everybody else in line. But anyhow, thank you. You can weave your answer into some other questions when you have a little more time later. Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Braceras, under your leadership, the Utah Department of Transportation is working to increase ridership on the Front Runner commuter rail line. This transit project will help meet the demands of rapid population growth in Utah by providing an alternative to driving along a crucial corridor. To do so, the Front Runner project will need more than $1 billion in federal capital investment grant funding. Should Congress consider bringing the CIG program into the Highway Trust Fund to further the program's reliability across surface transportation bills?
Thank you, Ranking Member Norton, for that question. Like we mentioned earlier, the state of Utah is growing really fast, and we feel like we have a three-legged stool to address our mobility needs. One is we're still continuing to add capacity to the roadways. We need to increase our transit usage, and I appreciate you mentioning the Front Runner project. It's one of the most important projects we're working on with our partners at Utah Transit Authority, as well as our partners at the MPOs. We're trying to take the service. Right now, we can peak hour service because every 30 minutes, and we're trying to get to 15-minute peak hour service. And so that's why we feel very positive about our ability to compete in the capital improvement grant program to be able to fully fund the Front Runner project, which we think is a critical project for the 2034 Olympics that we have coming up. In direct response to your question, ma'am, I think you're going to have to look at, if you move it into the Highway Trust Fund, something's going to have to give. And right now, I think we can demonstrate across this country there is more demand, there's more needs in the Highway Trust Fund than we can even fund right now. So we're comfortable competing with where the CIG program is currently today, and we think we're going to be able to deliver, well, we know we're going to deliver that project prior to 2030.
Mr. Davis, public transit benefits everyone by reducing air pollution, easing congestion for drivers, connecting people to essential services, and providing good-paying jobs. However, Congress routinely hears calls to save money by eliminating the mass transit account from the Highway Trust Fund. Why would this fail to solve the Highway Trust Fund's solvency problem? And how would it harm transit?
Thank you, ma'am. Traditionally, there was a traditional rural bias in the highway program from day one back in 1916. Urban highways used to be illegal under federal law until 1944. They couldn't use federal money. And the rural bias of the program still exists to some extent because you got to have roads through a long stretch of nowhere to connect big cities A to big city B. The highway guys resented, I believe, mass transit letting them into the system originally because the program as it was in the 70s and 80s was much more about the 10 or so big legacy cities that had existing rail systems. Since then, under Senator Shelby in particular, the transit system has branched out a lot more emphasis on transit in mid-sized and smaller cities, rural bus service, things like that, trying to deliver more specific usability to rural areas. But there was the fact that political parties have gotten polarized and population density is now as good a metric as you can find for political polarization hasn't really helped things. But regardless of why people may have been opposed to mass transit out of the trust fund in the first place, the fact is that outlays have grown so great now that it wouldn't fix things. On page 9 of my testimony, I did a hypothetical where that if you threw mass transit and motor carrier safety and highway safety out of the trust fund and then went through just highways and got rid of all the congestion relief, Green New Deal stuff, alternatives, any bike paths, anything, you're still $9.5 billion short in 2026 of having the Federal Highway Administration by itself sufficient on the entire existing system of taxes. So the days of when throwing the non-traditional, non-core highway programs out would have balanced things have long since passed us by.
My time has expired.
Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you conducting this hearing today. Thank you to the witnesses here as well. And as we all know, electric vehicles are notoriously heavy by comparison to the combustion engine vehicle counterparts. We've seen over the last several years, production of EVs is continually rising, resulting in more on the road. So more on the road means more wear and tear on our infrastructure. And I'm all for vehicle choice. And I wouldn't tell someone what car they can or can't purchase, but I have some concerns about the fact that currently there's no model for EV owners to pay into the trust fund that actually pays for the wear and tear imparted on those roads. And I think we just can't sustain that level of fatigue. It's unfair to the rest of the drivers who continue to pay into that system. So I wondered if you could speak on how having EV owners pay their share into the Highway Trust Fund can address that discrepancy. Mr. Braceras, we can start with you if you want to weigh in.
Yes, so going back to 2003, 2004, the Utah legislature was asking this same question. And that's when the legislature made a decision that we wanted to proceed forward with finding a way to implement a road usage charge. And it was about the principle of fairness. And so we've been doing pilots over the years. In 2020, we did launch our road usage charge program. And the way this was done was the legislature imposed a $140 a year fee, registration fee, we'll call it, on electric vehicles. And if they chose to participate in the road usage charge program, so choice, then they could waive that fee and they would be charged on the actual miles that they drove. The marketing slogan we used at the time, because we were worried if people would participate, was if you drive less, you pay less. And we capped it at the $140, that maximum fee.
I got to tell you, that's a real bargain, $140 on the front end versus what they would pay, what gas burners are paying, diesel burners are paying. That seems like everybody be jumping out there and saying, yeah, sign me up.
Yeah, it was, if I may, Mr. Chairman, it's we figure about $100 less than what a gasoline operator would pay for that same usage.
Wow. I don't know how you arrived at that number necessarily, but it seems like a heck of a bargain for EV users to be able to pay at that low rate on the front end. But that's something that we can discuss. I guess another concern that I have is, Mr. Braceras, you stated in your testimony the privacy component to implementing a user pay system and how important it is for ensuring privacy safeguards. we all talk about that privacy, but guess what? We're all carrying these around. These are the transponders that mark everybody in the room at any given time. And so we're having the conversation about, well, I want to safeguard my privacy. And yet we're walking around having that conversation while we've got one of these or two in our pockets at any given time. So how do we balance that? I fully get, I serve on the Intel Committee, I get the risk associated with that, sharing data of various entities. How do we bridge that gap, number one? Number two, if we're talking about vehicle miles traveled, how do we do it in a way that is conscious of the fact that it could create a cash flow problem? Because right now, we pay as we go. User pays, yes, but the current model, we pay as we go, so we don't really feel it. But if we're paying that vehicle miles traveled after the fact as we go into register our vehicles, now we're talking about for working folks, you're going from maybe $65 in some states to register your vehicle to maybe $1,600 because now you're paying for the miles in arrears. How are we going to address that?
Well, one of the things that we're doing if you opt into our road usage charge program, we can do it by monthly payments. And to touch on privacy real quick, there is a different standard between the way the public looks at privacy with a private company, my phone company, versus the way people think of government. You would think we would trust our government more, but that's not the case. So we think it's really important to always lead with privacy, talk about your principles, and talk about how you're going to protect it, how important that is.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've got a lot of other topics I would like to address, but I've only got 30 seconds, so I'm going to give you that 30 seconds back, Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also Ranking Member Norton for convening this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. Every day, Americans are stuck in traffic, stranded by failing transit, and forced to risk their safety on crumbling roads and bridges. When local roads are ignored, it's not the powerful who feel it first, it's the working class, the people who can't afford a second car or a detour, who feel it first. We were promised an administration that would put people first, and instead the American people received cuts to funding, chaos, and complete disregard for the rule of law. That neglect continues to leave bridges collapsing, buses breaking down, and opportunities out of reach. But it didn't just start 100 days ago. The Grover Norquist No New Tax Pledge, or called the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, has been in force since 1986. And since 1990, the overwhelming majority of Republicans in Congress, most of whom have signed on to that Taxpayer Protection Pledge, have refused to vote for a tax increase. So in 1993, when the Highway Trust Fund increased to 18 cents a gallon for the gas tax, most Republicans voted against it, and they have continued to vote against it each and every time there's been an opportunity to increase it. And so that 18 cents per gallon was not indexed to inflation, and so the money is being eaten up, and that's what's causing our roads and bridges to crumble. And so now we have a proposal to produce some revenue into the Highway Trust Fund by charging EV owners a $200 a month assessment, which I'm not disagreeing with that. I think the EV owners should pay into the system. But I wonder whether or not Grover Norquist is going to say that that's a tax increase. And if he does, the same way he has said that increasing the Highway Trust Fund is a tax increase and he's opposed to it, my friends on the other side of the aisle will be opposed to it also, and then we will continue, while cutting taxes for the top 1% in this country, we'll continue to see our roads and bridges crumbling because we're failing to invest. We know what smart investment looks like. It means giving communities the certainty to plan, not just for the next election, but for the next generation. It means ensuring local governments aren't left to fight for scraps, and that cleaner, smarter transportation is part of the solution, not an afterthought. The future of our transportation system and the strength of our economy depend on it. Mr. Tomer, the Department of Transportation recently sent a letter to grant recipients warning that it could pull federal funding from cities and states that don't align with its interpretation of immigration enforcement or anti-discrimination laws. In practice, that means that if a community limits cooperation with ICE, or if DOD deems a local policy, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, discriminatory, it could lose access to critical infrastructure funding for roads, bridges, and transit systems. This raises serious concerns. Mr. Tomer, how effective is it to tie transportation funding to these kinds of legal and political debates?
I appreciate the question, Representative. I can't speak to the politicization of some of this, and I'm certainly not an immigration lawyer. What I can speak to in an apolitical way is that delivering on projects, and as I mentioned in my opening statement, the certainty that the Highway Trust Fund promotes is good for economic development for communities of all kinds.
Yeah, but my question has to do with these extraneous requirements having nothing to do with transportation, impinging and preventing transportation projects from being funded. It's wrong, isn't it?
I can't speak to what the
Let me ask Mr. Burkhart, what do you have to say about it, sir? Excuse me for interrupting, Mr. Tomer. I'm running out of time. Real quick, Mr. Burkhart. Microphone.
You know, transportation programs are funded by the Highway Trust Fund and are bipartisan programs, and Congress's continued support for them showcases how invaluable they are at improving our transportation.
Okay, so everybody's afraid to cross Donald Trump. I get it. But thank you all for your appearance today, and I yield back.
Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this meeting, and certainly a timely subject, probably the most important one we're addressing. So, Mr. Johnson, you talked about some of the proposals that are out there. How would you approach the various funding proposals that we've had before us regarding the Highway Trust Fund solvency?
Could you repeat the question again?
Well, I'll try to. I might have forgot what it was. So we have a lot of proposals out there regarding the funding of the transportation and the future of it. So how would you approach the solvency of the transportation fund? How would you do that?
Well, thank you for that question. The asphalt industry supports anything that allows the HTF to retain its financial stability. We're agnostic to what particular method it is. The four that I laid out earlier that we've mentioned are raising the gas tax, fees for EV fees, vehicle miles traveled, or the tiered weight fees. Any four of those we would be acceptable with.
So you're not wed to any particular proposal then, right?
No, sir. Anything that adds funds to so that we can perform more of the work that we do for our communities we're for it.
Right. So, Mr. Burkhart, how would you kind of approach if we had an infrastructure bank, which we don't have, but if we did, a federal infrastructure bank, it leverages only private money, no tax dollars in it. Could you see that enhancing the funding of the infrastructure of this country?
Yes, I believe an infrastructure bank could be used to supplement a lot of the current funding tools And as Mr. Johnson alluded to, there's many methods to, that collectively can help fund our transportation improvements, and we see that infrastructure bank is a good option, and it also could signal the federal government's openness and commitment to working with the private sector, and would also provide a clearinghouse that could attract eligible other private financing. So we see the infrastructure bank as one of many potential solutions to address the funding challenges.
Thank you so much. You're back.
Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've been a member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee since 2015, and in the over 10 years that I've served on this committee, we have had several hearings about the need for long-term funding solutions for the Highway Trust Fund. In those 10 years, we've passed 2 prior surface transportation authorization bills, the 2015 FAST Act and the 2021 IIJA. And in both of these bills, we were forced to rely on general revenue transfers to shore up the Highway Trust Fund. But it's not just the last 2 surface transportation reauthorizations that relied on this mechanism. As we've heard in testimony today and many times before, Congress has not raised the gas tax since 1993, which is the primary source of revenue for the Highway Trust Fund, and the revenues coming into the trust fund have not kept pace with outlays since 2001. But here we are again, having the same conversation about the problem while the House Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over the revenues, has been unable to come up with a solution. So I really wish we were having a joint hearing with Ways and Means. It might be more productive. Another alternative that I think we should consider is a change to the House rules to give the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee jurisdiction over the revenue piece of the Highway Trust Fund. Maybe then we could really make some headway on a long-term solution. Until we find one, it seems we may be doomed to repeat the same hearing every couple of years, like the movie Groundhog Day, where nothing ever changes until we flip the script and make radical positive changes. Yesterday, I went on the House Ways and Means website and searched for the words Highway Trust Fund to find the date of their last hearing on this subject. Would you be surprised to know that the search returned not a single result? Does anyone know when the last time was that the House Ways and Means Committee had a hearing focused specifically on Highway Trust Fund? Asking any of you who are testifying.
There was one around 2004, I think.
And what did they conclude?
They wound up not recommending any significant rate increase. Although there was some weird stuff with the way the ethanol was taxed. They found things around the edges and found some extra dollars for the trust fund, much of which wound back up in Bill Thomas's district. It's earmarks.
Well, thank you. I don't think that. I think my opinion, my argument here still stands pretty firm. But I will move on. So, Mr. Bracareras? Anyway, I appreciate your testimony noting the importance of the Olympics and understanding both your state and my state, I'm from California, are both anticipating a great Olympics. But my question to you is, have you had any discussions with the City of Los Angeles, State of California, with regards to awareness that the federal government needs to pitch in here, understanding that I think both in Salt Lake City ahead of the 2002 Olympic Games and to Atlanta ahead of the 1996 Games, the federal government certainly provided resources to ensure that we had success with the Olympic Games. So have you had any further conversations with Los Angeles with regards to upping the awareness around this issue?
Yes, ma'am, we have. We all talk together as transportation geeks, and so we talk and leverage what we learned in 2002. We've shared that with Los Angeles and with the transit districts there as well, and we're going to certainly have some folks on the ground there during the games to learn as well. So we go back and forth. It's a good
So are you
conversation.
getting any positive feedback from the federal government with regards to additional funding to support the games?
I know my delegation, the Utah delegation, is very interested in helping Utah prepare for the 2034 games. And when we think about preparing it, we don't want to build projects just for the games. We look at the games as an operational event. So we're going to look to the federal government for support on things like security. We're going to have to bring in a lot more transit vehicles, buses mostly. And so we look for that support from the federal government. We received it prior to 2002, and we expect to be successful going forward.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Babin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the hearing today, and I'm honored to be seated here on this esteemed committee for another important round of surface transportation reauthorization. I'm also glad that we're discussing the Highway Trust Fund, the continued solvency of which is absolutely critical to the longstanding health of our nation's roads and highways and bridges going into the future. But, and my friends on the committee who have been here a while know this, I'm very concerned that my home state of Texas is continuing to pay more than their fair share, more than they get out of it. Texans receive a paltry 84% rate of return on Highway Trust Fund programs, meaning that for every dollar the state puts in, they only get 84 cents back. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you and my other colleagues on this committee on the dais to try to correct this issue. Well, that said, I'll move into my questions. Mr. Burkhart, you note in your testimony that rural residents in states like Georgia and Maryland would end up paying less under a mileage-based user fee as compared to the current gas tax. Could you explain why a mileage-based fee works better for rural communities?
Yes, thank you for your question, Mr. Chairman. Many folks in the rural communities have vehicles that have lower gas mileage, lower than, in some cases, 20 miles per gallon. And so they pay quite a bit more in comparison to more efficient vehicles, which tend to be people that are living in suburban or urban communities. And so that's where the cost differential happens. And interestingly, this is part of what we're finding in working with states on their mileage-based user fee pilots, is that education is essential to these programs to ensure that people understand the result of the mileage-based user fee.
Thank you. And just to follow up, how can Congress act to make sure that a mileage-based fee does not overburden our trucking industry, who collectively log thousands of miles driven? Mr. Burkhart.
Can you repeat the question, please?
How can Congress act to make sure that a mileage-based fee does not overburden our trucking industry, who drives thousands of miles?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, a tiered program that would address the weight of vehicles is what the mileage-based user fee pilots are looking at. And so making sure that that fair share is attributed as the vehicles put wear on their transportation system. That's how we would feel that should be approached.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Braceras, I'm also concerned with the red tape surrounding the deployment of projects in our rural areas. Do you see any opportunities to streamline federal requirements tied to Highway Trust Fund dollars that would help rural state departments of transportation to deliver projects more efficiently and cost effectively?
Thank you for the question.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. There's always opportunities to improve and streamline the way we deliver our projects. We work closely with our local governments, and we actually provide the technical expertise to help our governments deliver those projects. Now, other examples that we utilize is Where a local government may want to do their project on their own, we do an exchange for federal dollars. So we'll exchange 85 cents on the dollar, and the local communities then can have the flexibility to execute their projects the way they want. They feel it's much more effective, and they can deliver those projects faster. So that's one tool that we utilize in Utah on an ongoing basis.
I got you. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and of course, all the witnesses here today. It's clear that the Highway Trust Fund status quo is no longer viable. The billions of dollars that Congress has transferred from the general fund to the Highway Trust Fund since 2008 tells us as much. All Americans are subsidizing driving, whether they actually drive or not. And what have we received in return? Lots of bad stuff, traffic and congestion. According to INRIX, a transportation analytics company, the typical U.S. driver lost 43 hours in traffic in 2024. Our communities also suffer from heavy pollution. The American Lung Association estimates that 46% of all Americans are living in places that get failing grades for unhealthy levels of ozone or particulate matter. People of color and people with lower incomes disproportionately live in areas affected by higher levels of air pollution, leaving them vulnerable to respiratory diseases, heart disease, and adverse birth outcomes. But despite all these facts, worsening traffic, public health risks, and environmental injustice, Congress continues to prioritize highway spending over public transit via the 80-20 split. That is 80% for highways and 20% for public transit. It's a funding paradigm that's outdated and unresponsive to the needs of local communities. I'm a big supporter of increasing funding for public transit and getting on par with highway spending. Mr. Tomer, as you point out in your testimony, the U.S. DOT estimates that the reinvestment backlog of transit assets falling below the state of good repair is over $100 billion. The backlog ranges from transit vehicles like buses and rail cars to system components like train signals. How would shifting the funding split in the Highway Trust Fund towards public transit help transit systems address the reinvestment backlog and improve their service?
Yeah, Representative Garcia, thank you for the question. The Congress has been really clear over the past few decades that as we've finished the grand project that was building out the national interstate system and bundled under the formal National Highway System moniker, right, which my colleague, Mr. Davis, spoke about, and this original fiscal system we set up was in fact capturing user fees from all users because that National Highway System, it didn't exist yet, right? We had to pool this money. The states were the right entity to give it to build out that network. Now that that network's been built, the Congress, particularly since 1991 with Senator Moynihan and other leadership, have been looking for different ways to offer flexibilities, both to states, to other potential recipients, those who work directly with the states to think about different flexibilities, and that's inclusive of transit. What I think you're raising, and both with the FTA's own conditions assessments, frankly, sister data, if you will, from the Federal Highway Administration, is that we need to think about differently about investments, particularly in regions and localities, giving them flexibilities to make the investments that work right for them. We know even in the state of California, right, there's only so much real estate left to build, and in fact, we need to build kind of better in the locations where people already live and think different about how people move around. So it's not just that there's this backlog of investment. I think the Congress has been clear about giving those flexibilities, and investing more in transit is clearly one of those areas where the need exists.
Thank you for that. Next, I'd like to briefly discuss a proposal to have EVs pay into the Highway Trust Fund. My Republican colleagues are pursuing a punitive fee of $200 on EVs as part of reconciliation. That's despite the fact that the average passenger vehicle paid $82 into the Highway Trust Fund last year. Mr. Davis, at what amount would you recommend setting an EV fee that does not tax drivers unfairly based on the kind of vehicle that they choose?
Based on the statistics the Federal Highway Administration published a couple of months ago, the 2023 averages, the average short wheelbase vehicle, under 112 inches, paid about $80 in gasoline taxes, and the average long wheelbase of the bigger truck and SUV van paid about 112, so about a $90 average, $90 a year average. As Mr. Crawford mentioned, there is a weight differential for EVs, particularly on the heavier end. You could maybe juice that up to have EVs pay a bit more, but 200 a year seems a little more than the average ICE vehicle plus that weight differential Mr. Crawford was talking about. So it's not ridiculously out of proportion, but maybe a little bit more.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I seek through unanimous consent submit a letter for the record from the Charge Coalition detailing how a $200 EV fee is harmful on consumers and fails to address the solvency issues with the Highway Trust Fund.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Mr. Davis, I'd like to, got a couple questions for you. On your history with the Highway Trust Fund and research, what do you see are the turning points that have led us to this current structural deficit we have? And well, just go from there, please.
The first turning point was so slow that I didn't notice it really until a couple of years ago, that back in the glory days, the 50s and 60s, VMT, the amount driven, was increasing by 4.5% per year on average. That's higher than inflation. Then that started to change in the 80s and then again in the early 2000s. So now it's only increasing by less than 0.5% a year. So even if you stop selling EVs tomorrow,
0.5% a year of increased
VMT. And so even if you stopped selling EVs and gasoline mileage stayed right where it is, that's the most that the gas tax receipts could go up without a rate increase. It's about 0.5% per year. And then starting after the OPEC embargo and then Iran, the mileage kept getting better and better, so fewer gallons per mile. And then finally, the last few bills starting in 2005 have intentionally increased spending greater than anticipated revenues. So we're three separate things.
The whole full court press we've heard from government and from different entities is that we want people to drive more efficient vehicles. And so what's the reward in that? Is that they are using less gas, but then now government looks at it like, well, you're not using enough gas, you're not generating enough tax. So what's the catch?
It made sense as a matter of energy policy after the OPEC and then environmental policy to encourage that. But people didn't realize until it was too late that you had federal energy environmental policy at loggerheads with federal highway finance policy, which was based on the number of gallons sold. And no one put it together until it was too late, apparently.
Yeah, okay. And we were talking about rural areas a little bit, and people might have lower mileage vehicles because they need four-wheel drive, or they're doing the types of jobs and such in agriculture or mining or timber, things like that. So aren't they still paying at the pump a proportionate amount to what they drive? I mean, the worse the mileage is, the more you're going to pay, right?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Okay. So to expand on the how the electric vehicles are playing a role these days in lack of revenue.
Well, currently EVs don't pay any taxes to the Highway Trust Fund. And
yeah, a minute ago we heard it called, it's a punitive tax to put any kind of tax on it. What do you think about that?
You can argue the level, but the EV should be paying something if you're going to continue the user pay, user benefit system. That philosophical decision needs to be made whether to continue user pay, user benefit, or move on to something else. Because if you continue user pay, that limits the universe of new revenue sources you can find to highway and transit users. But if you're going to continue user pay, EVs should definitely pay something. It just becomes a question of what level and how to collect it.
It would seem so, yeah. So how much heavier is an EV vehicle compared to, let's say, the same size of car that's not EV?
It depends. It's really bad on the truck and SUV side. The Ford F-150 Lightnings and those Hummers are several thousand pounds heavier than their equivalents. But on the smaller car end, it's not so much. I remember at one point, the Chevy Volt or Bolt, whichever it was, had within 50 pounds, same weight and wheelbase as the Corvette. And if you drive a Corvette the way God meant you to drive a Corvette, you're using a lot of gallons of gas, but the Bolt could follow that behind there at the same speed and pay nothing. So that was my old example of why you should pay something.
God bless America on that, right? What do you see? Well, there's going to be a lot of talk about this vehicle mileage tax, and I'm greatly concerned about the methods that'll be collected. What do you see, Mr. Davis, is going to be the actual collection and tracking method that's most likely to be used?
I am continue to worry about the administrative costs, because right now the gas tax is so easy to collect because it's collected at the refinery or tank farm.
Yep.
1,300 points of collection versus 285 million registered auto vehicles. The IRS still hasn't considered how much they're going to have to invest in manpower and technology to implement such a tax, and it would not be quick to implement.
Exactly. That's my concern, is that you're going to create a whole new bureaucracy to chase people around on their mileage they put on each one of their vehicles, versus when you pay at the gas pump, the system is already there to do it. So why do we want to do that? And then I wonder how intrusive it is to be tracking people's mileage. Are we going to end up with those, little bing bong things that you drive through the toll gates? Are we going to have GPS on there tracking people, where they go and what they do? What do you see on that?
The time is up, but you can do it that way, or you can just do an odometer measure once a year that's not intrusive at all. So there are a variety of ways to implement a fee.
Yeah, all right. Certainly not invading people's privacy on that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this meeting. Obviously, this is a lively topic. I'm glad to be a part of it. So I'm just going to kind of jump right into it, because we've been talking about the solvency or lack thereof of the Highway Trust Fund, and we've seen that the expenditures have exceeded the revenue, which obviously is a problem, and this trend has continued over several decades. And for communities without state resources to make up for these lost funds, like many of the communities I serve, this would be devastating. Ohio has certainly received billions of dollars from the Highway Trust Fund, and we host millions of travelers that come through our state using our very robust highway system, and our ability and the fact that we're centrally located allows for us to welcome all of these visitors, but not without additional costs. So I've heard a couple of solutions here and over the months that we've been preparing for this conversation, including increasing the gas tax for short, adding a new tax to EVs and hybrids, and creating a mileage-based user fee. And I think I want to focus our conversation back on the people who are going to be impacted about all of those decisions the most, the American public, because between the tariffs on vehicles that changes in a blink of an eye, that might even be changing today, the cost of living that has not been addressed as promised, my constituents just don't have the money to pay more in gas taxes. And the cost of owning a car seems like it's going to not be a reality for many individuals between the tariffs, the uncertainty, and increasing whatever costs might come about these discussions. So I just want to ask the panel, and I'll start to my left, how do you justify increasing this? What would you say to me as I go back to my community and say, these are the options on the table after you are currently struggling to pay your bills in order to pay for this Highway Trust Fund, in 30 words or less? I believe in you. You can all do this.
First of all, I believe that the transportation is one of those foundational issues that all of our citizens need to have functioning well, and that our responsibility in government is to be able to provide that at the lowest cost for our citizens. And really, I got a call from the Wall Street Journal, I'm not doing 30 words, sorry, from the Wall Street Journal in 2015 when we passed the gas tax increase. And they said, I thought Utah was a conservative state. And I said, we are. Conservative people take care of what they have. That's a lower cost of ownership. So I would recommend that being able to connect the benefits that they receive from transportation to the costs that they pay is an important component.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. So I just want to say that the heavy highway paving industry is a very competitive industry. The money that is spent by the federal government and the state government goes very far because it is a very competitive industry. We we work hard every day to try to get our costs as low as possible, and that cost is passed along to the users. And we believe in order to maintain those communities and be able to service those communities, the Highway Trust Fund needs to be funded by the users so that we can continue to provide that service and that connectivity that the communities need.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Beyond just the general sentiment that, you know, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and we haven't been paying for what we use, and it's time that we did that. It's important to emphasize the extent to which the Highway Trust Fund supports both mass transit and roads in wherever your district is, and that it's the cooperative nature of the highway, the state and local program to get your constituents where they need to go. And if we let the federal side of it atrophy too far, it's going to local commuting and local connectivity to the national system will suffer.
We only have 30 seconds left. Mr. Burkhardt.
Yes. I would say that ultimately, goods movement, improved goods movement and mobility will make the local economy thrive. So telling your local business owners that investments in transportation will actually help them and will make their lives better.
Mr. Tomer.
This money gets you to work, gets your kids to daycare, to school. But what I'd make sure that they're asking back of you is how do we make sure we see these returns back in our community in the way we want to see it?
Thank you so much, and I just hope as we continue this conversation, we don't forget about the fact that the cost of living is entirely too high in this country, and we're considering who is going to have to shoulder this burden as we make decisions moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Mr. Barrett, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and excuse me. I'll get that figured out one of these days. Thank you all for being here and for your participation in today's hearing. Mr. Johnson, I had a question for you. How can we be sure that additional dollars, because a lot of the focus of this hearing today is around the injection of more money into the Highway Trust Fund that will ultimately make its way into state governments, local governments, or into the system that will result in the paving of roads that's, you know, the part that your organization does. But how can we be sure that investment of more dollars will actually yield more miles of road or more infrastructure, more bridges built, things like that? It's been one of my frustrations coming from state government before serving in this role was that we injected more money into our transportation budget, but it always felt like the rate of inflation around funding of highway projects, road building, and everything else far exceeded the rate of inflation in the overall economy, and we weren't always yielding more miles of paved road, for example. Can you help me understand how we can expect a correlating benefit from more money being spent?
Yeah, thank you for that question. As I stated in my previous answer there, our industry is very competitive. Almost every project that we perform for the government is a low bid situation. So we are constantly trying new methods, new innovative techniques, work harder to get our costs lower so that we can provide the roadway at the lowest possible price. And we're continuing to innovate through recycled asphalt pavement or new innovative designs in order to try to keep that as low as possible so those dollars go as far as possible.
Sure, and I know that there's, you know, a bid process and everything else, but we're dealing with, you know, sourcing of aggregate and, you know, some of the other scarcity of materials and workforce issues. We have, I think, 7 million men in America that are on the sidelines not working and not seeking work right now. I think we've got a whole bunch of issues combined that are contributing to this that could be addressed. And I'm not suggesting that we don't need more money into the system, but I also want to make sure that any additional investment we do would be met with a commensurate increase in output that would actually be to the benefit of drivers. I think one of their biggest frustrations is they feel like taxes or fees or other things go up and they don't actually see the outcome in resultant benefit of infrastructure. I did have another question. I'm not sure who on the panel would be best for this. Maybe Mr. Davis, this would be more in your bucket, but the VMT issue of total miles traveled, where do you see the relationship between total miles traveled and I guess the obligation for the user to pay for that use of the roads versus the person who might drive relatively little but still needs those roads available for the time that they do drive. So somebody who may not travel very often still needs that road to connect them. You know, it needs to be available all the time for them to drive and visit relatives, go to the doctor, and, you know, pursue the obligations that they have. So that entirely, I guess, placing the entire cost expectation on the number of miles driven versus the I guess, comparative ratio of having the available infrastructure, where do you see that falling, and would we be placing all of our eggs in one basket, and would it affect, you know, rural drivers like those in my district who may travel further but still need, you know, other folks need the benefit of the highway system, whether they drive every day or not?
That's an excellent point. Right now, as I mentioned, 3 of the 5 existing taxes, the gasoline, diesel, and heavy truck tire, tax basically the extent of your driving. You know, you drive more, you consume more gallons, truck burns more tires. And the other 2 are just once a purchase or once a year for system access. And I think a blend of those concepts in the future is probably accurate because, you know, a good amount of it is based on VMT wear and tear, not just wear and tear, but also congestion. But system access is an area that we haven't taxed enough on the individual side that perhaps there's room for.
And you alluded, and I've only got a few seconds left, so I apologize, but you alluded to if we don't do a VMT or a user-based fee, like some other application of building the Highway Trust Fund would be necessary. Do you have any alternative methods? You know, we seem to be at a stalemate between VMT, gas tax, degrading value of that with fuel economy in electric vehicles. What would be an alternative method of doing this that you would feel would be fair?
User fee is better, but if you're going to keep a trust fund, if it's not user fee, at least it's got to be a reliable. That's the most important thing, is reliable year-to-year sense of revenue, as little volatility as possible. At one point, there was a suggestion for a crude oil barrel tax. I believe Mr. DeFazio chased that for a while. And something like that would be not directly highway user because you're taxing the plastics industry and whoever else uses oil, but it would be better than nothing. It would be more and less volatile.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Nadler, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Braceras, your testimony calls for the committee to reauthorize the funding baseline in the BIL plus inflation. Do you view that baseline as solely covering the Highway Trust Fund programs, or do you mean that baseline to include the programs covered by advance appropriations as well?
I mean both, sir. I think we need to take the baseline that we're putting toward, that you've used for advance appropriation for the surface transportation system, and take that combined with the Highway Trust Fund, and we need to grow that for inflation in order to just meet the basic needs that we have in front of us today.
Thank you. For decades, the Highway Trust Fund was funded primarily through gas taxes paid by drivers, but that hasn't been the full story for a long time. Today, gas tax revenues cover barely half of the trust fund's spending. I think this was mentioned earlier. And Congress has repeatedly used general taxpayer dollars, including more than $275 billion since 2008, to keep it solvent. That means every taxpayer, including millions of Americans who don't own a car and rely on public transit, are already helping to fund the system. Transit riders are paying into the trust fund too, and they deserve a fair share of the investment. Mr. Davis, you've written extensively about the Highway Trust Fund's history and the political compromises that shaped its evolution, including the creation of the mass transit account in 1982. As you have noted, transit investments often relieve congestion, expand access to jobs, and protect road infrastructure by reducing wear and tear. Given these benefits, can you discuss the importance of maintaining and strengthening dedicated transit funding within the Highway Trust Fund?
If you go back and look at the debates in the 70s and early 80s, the urban lobby was arguing about facts on the ground. They said, okay, our big cities don't need more urban cross freeways, we need more transit. They really didn't care where the money came from. The trust fund lobby, on the other hand, was saying the Highway Trust Fund was user pay, user benefit, and that's the way it's set up, and this is a violation of that. And both sides were correct because they were having different arguments at the same time talking past each other. And it took, in 1972, it took until the urban vote got big enough that they were able to defeat a highway bill for the first time. And eventually in 73, they wound up getting a compromise to open the trust fund up to transit projects when the locals would select. And then again in 82, they realized early on that they were going to need the urban vote, and so they went ahead with the penny for transit, 80-20 split of the new revenue for a mass transit account then. So what it took in the past was the plain fact that the bill couldn't pass without the votes that demanded mass transit funding. It was pure and simple. And since then, you've had, the mass transit account still only gets about 13% of trust fund revenues because the trucking revenues and the pre-1982 gas and diesel revenues are still entirely devoted to the highway account. So they're getting about 20% of trust fund spending, but only about 13% of trust fund revenues. So the mass transit account is much more extended.
13% of trust fund revenues comes from where?
It goes to the mass transit account. They get about 13% of the revenues, depending on how volatile trucking is, and they're getting 20% of the, roughly 20% of the spending. So the mass transit account is much more over-leveraged than the highway account at present, and something's got to be done to ameliorate that as well.
Yeah, especially since gas tax revenues cover barely half of the trust fund's spending, and the other half is coming from the taxpayer.
Yes.
Mr. Davis, Mr. Tomer, your testimony highlights the urgent need for investments in transit assets and the growing backlog of repairs. Given shifting demographics, climate challenges, and the need to connect all Americans to economic opportunity, how critical is it that Congress preserve and expand federal investments in public transit? And what risks do we face if we fail to do so?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Representative Nadler. The study after study on kind of all across the intellectual spectrum shows that transit produces net benefits to society, what economists will also often wonkily call like agglomeration economies, spillovers. The point is this helps grow places, helps get people to work, particularly in a more affordable manner. It provides net economic benefit. It's not just the communities it's in, but the country as a whole. The question I think for the Congress, as my colleague was just speaking to, is how do you set up the revenue system in a sustainable way to make sure that you can kind of invest in all of the above solutions that make sense for each of these communities?
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Collins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was making some notes there on something that was just said. Sorry about that. Listen, I just want to take a few minutes and I want to speak from the perspective of a trucker because I'm in the trucking business. It's all I've done all my life. And I guess the first thing I want to start out with is just a list of taxes that we pay from the trucking industry. I mean, first of all, we pay for IRP tags, which is supposed to be the International Registration Plan, for every truck, every tag, every year. Then we've got FET tax on new purchases, which is based on the purchase price, which when I bought my first truck back in the early 90s, fully loaded, decked out, was $81,000. Today's pushing over $200,000 per truck. Trailers are the same way. We pay FET tax on every tire we buy. And by the way, there's 18 tires on an 18-wheeler. And we use a lot of them. We pay fuel tax based on fuel mileage in every state across this country, no matter whether you buy fuel in that state, and the tax is based on the tax rates for that state. We also pay the federal highway use tax, which has gone up over years. We used to pay it in arrears based on how many trucks you did have for the past year. Now we pay it up front on how many trucks you have today in one lump sum, and there is no refund if you wreck or if you sell the truck, period. So that's just a conglomeration of what we pay to stay out there on the road. And when you look at things like what we've had to watch over the past administration with the IIJA, with $1.24 trillion, whatever it is that was spent, when less than half of it went to fix our roads and bridges out there. The majority of it we had to watch as they built bike paths and I don't even know if they ever built an EV charger. But we had to watch as our taxpayer dollars were spent on something that was unnecessary when we're out there sitting in congested roads, can't move, roads that need potholes fixed, bridges that need to be replaced. On average, road construction, from the time it starts to the time it's finished, 7.5 years before they get started on the road, 10 years to finish it. What does that tell you? They spend most of the time on permits and all of these lawsuits from all of these environmentalists out there that are suing us. Then you take the contractor that's building the road. You realize that they pad their bills by 30% just to pay for all of these crazy permits, for all of these frivolous lawsuits that are going on? I guess one of the things I got to ask a couple questions. Mr. Johnson, asphalt, if I remember right? Asphalt price is based on what? Petroleum price? Does it go up when petroleum goes up? Goes down when petroleum goes down? Okay. Mr. Davis, this is a question I didn't understand you, and it's really a question I've been looking for. Does mass transit pay more into the Federal Highway Use Trust Fund than what they get back? Or do they get more out of it than what they pay in?
There are no specific taxes on the use of mass transit that go to the trust fund. Now, a lot of people who
But they get Federal Highway Use Tax.
I take the subway occasionally, but I also own a car. So, there are people
But mass transit gets Highway Trust Fund
yes,
money.
yes.
Okay.
Taxes on highway users are deposited to the mass
I think it's
transit.
somewhere around 6 to 8 billion a year, something like that. I think that's it.
It's about $5 billion a year.
Okay, that was the answer I was looking for. Thank you. Listen, truckers, and I know we're looking at how we're going to set this up. 98% of the trucking company out there are 10 trucks or less. These are generational. We work off of pennies per mile, 2.5% return. Truckers have paid enough into the tax system. If you want to do something, get your priorities right. Congress needs to get their priorities right and quit spending money on all this junk out there, like bike trails. Put it into the roads and the bridges that we need fixing and replaced out there. Get these frivolous lawsuits off of everybody. Get some loser pay out there. Give me some good tort reform. You will reduce the cost of what it's costing to build these roads and bridges out there. And you know what, Mr. Johnson, make us energy independent. You start producing oil here in our country, then you'll see the price of gas, you'll see the price of petroleum come down. And oh, by the way, the EPA, who has hounded on the truckers forever, we've gotten less fuel mileage every time the EPA makes a decision out there. Our fuel mileage goes down, so we pay more just by buying a gallon of fuel. The other thing I'd like to say, I know I'm out of time. I think we just need to block grant money to these states and let them handle how to best use it and fix their own roads and expand their own roads and bridges. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now yield back.
Ms. Friedman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for coming here today. As we discuss all these challenges facing the Highway Trust Fund, I want to just take a minute to talk about how we use the money that's in there. Something that LA knows a lot about is traffic congestion. The national statistics on highway congestion in 2022 shows that the cost of congestion was $244 billion nationwide. That's about $614 million a day that we spend because of congestion. It also wastes billions of gasoline nationally, with about 21 wasted gallons of gasoline per driver per year. It releases about 24 million tons of excess greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and congestion resulted in an extra 8.5 billion hours of traffic delays across the country. In LA alone, each commuter spent an extra 122 hours per year sitting in traffic. Nobody likes doing that, least of all me. Between 1993 and 2017, we've added 30,500 new freeway lane miles of roads in the largest 100 urbanized areas. That's a 42% increase in freeway lane miles. States alone spend more than $500 billion on highway capital investments in urbanized areas, with a significant portion spent on highway expansions. Now, in that same time frame that we were expanding all these highways and putting billions and billions of dollars into those projects, Traffic congestion in those 100 urbanized areas has grown by 144%. The evidence is clear, and study after study shows this, that highway expansions, now they do a lot of things. Sometimes they add roads to places that didn't have them before. Sometimes they make our roads a lot safer, and there's certainly places where we need to expand our highways. But when it comes to congestion, there's not really evidence that expanding highways to deal with congestion is doing anything except making congestion worse because of induced demand. Now, in my community, where we've widened the 5 freeway and many other roads, we've seen no measurable decrease in congestion, and it's come at a lot of cost to the residents who live around those highways, many of whom saw a marked decrease in their quality of life. And at the same time, that money that went into those expansions didn't go into things that we know reduces congestion, namely more investments in mass transit, in urban mass transit. Transit's estimated to reduce CO2 emissions by 37 million metric tons annually. Individuals who ride on public transportation instead of driving can save more than $13,000 a year. That's over $1,000 per month. And certainly for many people in our urban areas, they can't afford to own and operate a car, and so they're transit dependent. And because of our lack of investment in transit, we've given them many times really just terrible qualities of life because transit doesn't work well enough for them. It's too slow and it doesn't come fast enough. So, and also robust public transportation systems takes users off the road, which does reduce congestion and makes the roads not wear as quickly. Every $1 billion we invest in public transportation sustains $5 billion in long-term economic impact and 50,000 jobs, which sounds like a great value for taxpayers' money. So I'm going to ask Mr. Tomer, to your knowledge, is it standard practice across the country that when we're looking at investing our transportation dollars in our highway funds, that communities are doing a cost-benefit analysis of the same investment going into mass transit or going into a highway widening? I know that some communities have done this, but is this common practice and should it be?
Thank you for the question, Representative. Look, every state and community is different, and I think we know that. That's actually one of the kind of great features of this country. Our cost-benefit analyses have come under attack for decades now from academics, and this is really civil attack when I want to be clear, like a civil discourse. The question is, what are you trying to achieve? I mean, we've got to be blunt with all of ourselves here. What are we trying to solve? We know, and I really appreciate you bringing this up, that induced demand is effectively economic truth. You can't endlessly expand highways once you've built out a community. It's a fallacy to tell our households that suddenly this is going to solve congestion, because we know it's not. What bothers me the most, frankly, and I think it's in the tenor of today's conversation, it slows down freight, slows down trucking. I hate when deliveries are late to my house, and I'm sure businesses feel far worse when it's their bottom line. So I think what's key here is how do we think about sensible cost-benefit analysis that makes sense for each one of these communities. Oftentimes transit, like in greater Los Angeles, right, voters, over 2/3, approved this expansion because it's what made sense to them after, for generations, frankly, trying a different solution. It's gonna look different in different places, but again, as we keep adding people to this country, which is a truly bipartisan goal, we're gonna have to think about how we can realistically fit all of them and our businesses and their freight in these growing communities.
Well, thank you, because doing things the same way over and over again with bad results is not a good way for us to move forward. I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all of you for being here and testimony. You know, the previous Biden administration pushed an unsustainable mandate on the American people, electric vehicles. They tried to take the choice away from the American taxpayer. Former Secretary Buttigieg and I frequently sparred on this topic. I often had to remind him that the cars, electric vehicles, were unaffordable, inoperable in cold weather climates, and the infrastructure simply didn't exist to make it work. And when they siphoned billions of taxpayer dollars to pay for their Green New Deal agenda, they eliminated the Buy America provisions and used child slave labor to expedite the process. Obviously, I disagreed. Some people have bought into the EV way of life, and that's fine. What I've always wanted above anything else is consumer choice, flexibility for the American people to do what is best for them. But it's important to note that the current state of play is not fair. EVs currently benefit from the highway system, but do not contribute to it. What's worse is that they are heavy vehicles and far harder on our roads. Mr. Braceras, could you talk a little more about the annual fee the state of Utah has utilized in an effort to address EVs usage?
Thank you. Yes, so the state of Utah approached the idea here with one of fairness and choice. And so we recognize that EVs were not paying their fair share for their use of the roadway, but we wanted to give people a choice on how they would do this. So we approached it by doing a $140 annual fee on EVs, and then we have a road usage charge program, kind of a parallel program. And so folks can opt in to the road usage charge program. They don't pay the $140 fee, and they'll only pay for the miles that they drive. And so it's trying to be fair to the EV users, but also fair to the rest of the highway users. And we found this to be it's well accepted from our users. Obviously, if you have a choice, you've decided you like that approach. But we think that was, we feel very comfortable with that approach. I anticipate, now this is Carlos, not my state legislature, we anticipate that our next steps going forward will to require EV users to go into the road usage charge program. But that's a policy debate still to take place.
I think EV and hybrid fees are an important step to addressing parity on the roads and ensuring transportation infrastructure remains a shared responsibility. When the Biden administration mandated EV use, can you imagine being in northern Minnesota when it's 35 below, trying to get to work when the battery has 50% less usage or even less than that? And it was disappointing that we had to continuously push the former administration to allow us to have choice, just like you did for your citizens in Utah. You gave them a choice and an opportunity for them to choose. That's what the American people wanted. They didn't want the EV mandate forced down their throat. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses for being here for this very, very important hearing. Highway Trust Fund is essential to help states build out and maintain their infrastructure, but it is in need of real reform to make sure states like Arizona, my home state, get a fair deal. We need to be pragmatic about how this investment upkeeps highway and transit, keeping families and businesses connected. So I want to thank all of the witnesses for your recommendations as we work to develop a strong, bipartisan surface transportation reauthorization bill. In Arizona, like most states, we make the most of the formula funding that is allotted. ADOT uses Highway Trust Fund dollars to maintain its more than 28,000 lane miles. Federal formula funds are also used to modernize and improve safety along existing roadways, like US 93 connecting parts of rural western Arizona, which recently received federal funds to turn a 2-lane highway into a 4-lane divided highway, making it much, much safer. Projects like this improve safety for Arizonans, lessen congestion, and allow for more freight transportation to move across the state, an important part of our commerce. But even with investments like these, Arizona is doing more with less. Arizona has added more than 2 million people since just 2000. Our economy has grown exponentially, but current funding formulas are decades old and rely woefully on outdated census information and traffic data. Arizona is one of the fastest growing states in the country. But this year we received one of the lowest percentage of funds relative to our state's contribution. Continue to rely on this antiquated formula to determine future investments isn't just inefficient policy, it puts fast-growing states at a significant disadvantage and undermines our ability to tackle our significant and growing infrastructure needs. Just yesterday, I introduced a bipartisan bill with my colleague, Congressman Tony Gonzalez of Texas, to modernize this formula. Texas is another fast-growing state that has not seen the level of investment to keep up with its population. Our Highway Formula Fairness Act will allow for the decennial census to be considered when calculating apportionment, permitting states that have increased population since the previous sentence to receive funding that reflects that growth. It is just common sense. The bill would also require the Secretary of Transportation to conduct a highway formula modernization study to assess the methods and data that are currently used to apportion federal aid highway funds so we can keep up building and improving. Mr. Braceras, thank you for your perspective, both as a representative of AASHTO and as Executive Director for Utah. In your testimony, you reflected on that, like Arizona, Utah has seen increased growth. In fact, Utah was also one of the fastest growing states in the country. How would having a 10-year census numbers as part of the apportionment calculation for the Highway Trust Fund impact your state of Utah?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. And yes, like Arizona, Utah's growing tremendously right now, and it's really one of the biggest concerns that our citizens have. I would say the best data we have, let's use the best data we can have to make more informed decisions. And so I'm always a fan of getting the best data, the more recent data we can have to be able to make those decisions. So very supportive of the idea of that.
All right, and like Utah, Arizona has needs to improve our existing older infrastructure while keeping up with the growth needs. We need to do both. Mr. Johnson, in your testimony, you focused on federal investments for project delivery, workforce development, and economic activity as it relates to North Carolina. You brought up the importance of maintaining a user-based trust fund to ensure that critical road and bridge funding is not reprioritized. In your opinion, what would be the biggest mistake we could make regarding the Highway Trust Fund in this upcoming highway bill? What would cause the most harm on future highway construction funding?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. The biggest mistake we could do is to do nothing. It is a broken system. We know it's been a broken system, and there are numerous different alternatives out there that could help fix the system. So just asking Congress to, make a choice and hopefully fix the system for the long term.
Really appreciate it. By the way, the irony of it is that infrastructure investment is probably the most popular investment we can make at the federal level. The people do not mind. If they need to pay more, they know they're getting an infrastructure investment, which improves their lives and they know improves their local economy. Finally, just have a statement, Mr. Davis. I don't have a question, but just to say thank you to the team at Eno. The work that you do in providing support in a bipartisan way for this committee is important and will make us have a better surface transportation bill, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Math is a stubborn thing, of course, and the math tells us that if Congress does not act, the Highway Trust Fund will be insolvent in just 3 years. And because math is such a stubborn thing, we know that if Congress does not act, that we will be in a $50 billion hole by the year 2035. In fact, since 2008, we have put $275 billion from the general fund into the Highway Trust Fund. And at the same time, of course, we don't have everybody paying into the system. Now, a user-pays system works pretty well when everybody pays in. It really falls apart when you have free riders. That's why I was so grateful to hear Mr. Stauber, Mr. Braceras have a back and forth about my bill with Deb Fischer that would make sure that everybody's paying their fair share. And I was grateful for so many of the witnesses for addressing this issue in their testimony. And to make it clear, our bill, my bill with Senator Fischer would just say, hey, for those EVs, they're going to pay their fair share. We've calculated what would be a fair amount if they were an internal combustion engine. Of course, we have an accounting for the heavier weight because of the battery. It seems like it's an idea that's gaining some steam, and so, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for unanimous consent to enter this letter of support for my bill signed by 25 national associations.
Without objection, so ordered.
So, Mr. Johnson, any thoughts from you all or from the broader pavement and asphalt industry about our bill?
Well, I haven't read the bill, but from your question, we do think EVs, everyone should pay their share. EVs are heavier, they do weigh more than normal combustion vehicles, and they do have more wear and tear. And we believe that all users should be paying into the system to help support it.
Mr. Braceras, I was grateful to hear about Utah's experience. If we were to do something at the federal level, would that complicate Utah's efforts, or would they mesh pretty well?
I think they would mesh pretty well, Congressman. I think there's some details as I reviewed your bill that we could work through, but I think it would work really well.
Anything in particular from either of you gentlemen? And Mr. Johnson, you haven't read the bill yet, so maybe you get off the hook. But Mr. Braceras, is there anything we should, any way we should try to improve our bill, or do you think we're pretty close to the Goldilocks spot?
As I went through this bill and talked with staff, I made the comment it's a very thoughtful bill. And I think there's obviously, as these things move through the process, there's tweaks that need to be made. Right now, I look at the way the money's being received at the state level. There's every state receives the money through different organizations, but that's all stuff that could be worked out. So I think it's a good start.
Well, I would echo Mr. Johnson, who said to Mr. Stanton's very good question that the worst thing we could do is nothing. And I would observe that trying to make sure everybody pays their fair share is a very important ingredient, a critical ingredient in the something we must do with surface transportation reauthorization. Mr. Braceras, let's stay with you. I suspect we all know that studies indicate that an EIS through the federal highway takes 7 years. That's an obnoxious length of time, and it's almost a uniquely American problem. The same kind of highway project you can get done in Italy and France in 2 years does take 7 years in this country. When the Italians seem to be a paragon of efficiency, perhaps America has lost its way. And so I've got a bill that would, in essence, require that the agencies use a cloud-based platform to have an e-NEPA process. Of course, last week, President Trump signed an executive order that would do much the same thing. Your observations, sir, about my bill and the president's executive order?
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can do in this country to actually move projects forward. We seem more inclined anymore to stop things than we are to build things. And so one of the things we've done in the state of Utah, we're one of the first states to take on what's called NEPA assignments. So we are the decision makers on the EIS for the highway side of things. And I was challenged when we first did that is, why do you want to do that? Are you trying to shortchange the process? And it's no. I want to stand up with my citizens and explain why I made a decision. I don't want to point behind me and say, the feds made me do this. We've been able to demonstrate we can deliver environmental projects faster, both environmental assessments and EISs, significantly faster by taking on that NEPA assignment. And I think there's other ways that we could work with the federal government to find we need to build more in this country.
That's exactly properly said, Mr. Johnson. I'm sorry, I'm out of time, and I would just close by noting that given the strength of the comments by both of you, I would just ask my colleagues to look at both of those bills and consider signing on. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back. Sorry.
Mr. Carvajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Tomer, research shows that on average, states sub-allocate just 14% of transportation funds to local governments, well below the proportion of travel occurring on locally owned infrastructure. In 15 states, that share is less than 5%. What does this disparity suggest about the need for federal reforms that better empower local and regional partners?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Representative. I think at its core, what it speaks to is we have some faults inside our user pay kind of concept, right? Everyone's paying, but not everyone's getting their money back. And so I think there's a really fresh opportunity, particularly in this Congress, with lessons from the IIJA period in particular, to think about how do we make sure that the kind of fiscal resources are being returned if we're thinking about this kind of user pay and user benefits system that so many folks, including your colleagues here, have mentioned today. Now, part of the challenge is the federal government has chosen, really for decades upon decades, to apportion the money directly to the states, and that could work. What we're seeing inside our numbers, though, is that once the states control their fiscal resources, they're not passing it back to their regional partners. So I think the question before this Congress is, how much should, at least for federal funds, should the federal government be electing where those should be, kind of who should be the recipient of those, and doesn't want to weigh in any further than that?
Thank you. Mr. Tomer, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, MPOs, serve as a vital conduit between federal transportation policy and real-world implementation in the communities where most Americans live and work. Composed largely of local elected officials, MPOs offer both deep public engagement and regional coordination, yet their role is often constrained by limited authority and insufficient federal recognition. How can Congress better elevate and support the unique role MPOs and, by extension, local governments play in advancing national infrastructure goals?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's great. Let me answer in two parts. I'm going to be respectful of my colleagues to have a chance to answer questions too. The first one is that the Congress has done some impressive experimentation with performance measurement, performance management with our metropolitan colleagues. The question is, how can we extend that beyond them, also to their state peers? Thinking about what are we trying to get out of the system, right? What I like about both parties is they're constantly talking about accountability, and there's some real opportunities there. The second one is that, and let's all be frank, I mean, we'll have some upcoming research being published in a couple of weeks on this. Basically, every member of Congress, no matter how it's designed, they represent a metropolitan area. And what's so, I'm going to sound like such a nerd here, but like what is so cool about metropolitan areas is our jurisdictions are fixed for the most part, right? Unless you're like in a Nashville or Indianapolis and Louisville has some fascinating expansions. But the question is, at the metropolitan scale, how do we actually come together beyond those jurisdictional boundaries to actually work at the scale of where economies work, right? Now, the federal government's opportunity here, especially because it has mandated their existence in these places, they actually exist, right? They are a board-like structure where municipalities come together. How can we empower them to actually deliver more? So we personally are fans of actually passing more fiscal authority to them from the federal level, making sure they can then work with their member municipalities to think about investments that make sense for them and doing that alongside their state colleagues. So there's a lot of opportunities here.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, I know we're discussing how to best fund future highway bills via user fees, but it also comes down to how best to maximize these precious resources. Can you help give me some insight on how your industry is helping stretch taxpayer dollars for road construction using materials like reclaimed asphalt, RAP?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak about RAP. The asphalt industry, reclaimed asphalt is one of the most recycled products in the world, in the country. Through the process of maintenance, we remove a lot of asphalt or we remove a lot of roads, and 100% of that product is able to go back into our asphalt mixes. As much as 40% of our new asphalt going on the road is made with recycled asphalt. It's reclaimed from other jobs. It's not going to landfills. It saves us money. It saves the taxpayers money. It saves us energy. It is one of our highlights of our industry.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I have one more question for you, so I'm going to submit it, and hopefully we'll get an answer from you on the record. But thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'm out of time.
Mr. Shreve, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to our witnesses. I represent Central Indiana, so I'm one of those, Mr. Tomer, one of those communities that's something of a hybrid. Keenly interested in the subject. This is our fourth subcommittee hearing. In my district, I've got the Interstate 465 Ring Road around Indianapolis and 4 interstate highways that traverse the district. I'm going to point this question in the direction of Mr. Burkhardt. My district is a combination of urban, suburban, and rural. And in your dense submitted testimony, you spoke about the TPA in Tennessee, and that program's just a few years in the making. It may be possible for a Hoosier to learn something from a volunteer, possibly, but the relevance to that program caught my eye because it spoke to freeing up funding to invest in the condensed urbanized areas so as to move dollars into some of the rural communities. And in your testimony, you spoke about the extraordinary 3 to 5-fold return ratio on that. We can't begin to flesh out all the written testimony that the witnesses offer us, but if we could spotlight some of your experience that you've seen in Tennessee and what that may portend as a model as we figure out how we can fund these improvements, what was the term, the choice lanes in, say, 465, so as to have more dollars to work with on our arterials that emanate out from urban centers like Indianapolis or Louisville.
Thank you for your question. Jacobs was fortunate to have been able to work on part of the P3 program in Tennessee, and the thing that I think I hear resounding is speed to delivery, and that was one of the biggest results of that effort. Tennessee sought to accelerate their investment into infrastructure and passed a resolution to put $3 billion into state funding to add choice lanes. These choice lanes are managed lanes, they're tolled facilities, and they provide a means of revenue to help repay the investments. And it becomes a desirable business investment from concessionaires who will take on the asset to continue to improve that asset, and they're being held accountable for those lanes for a set amount of time. And so that is a model that we're seeing in some other locations across the state and that we participated on. Choice lanes or managed lanes is definitely a viable method.
Mr. Burkhart, if the act was passed by the Tennessee legislature in 2023, and given the 7-year sort of lead time that we've accepted at the moment that it may take to build out some of this infrastructure, can we draw conclusions as to whether or not this model is working in Tennessee, or is it very much in the beta testing stage?
Yeah, it's too early to tell, although we are already working alongside the state-appointed PMO office, Program Management Office, consulting organization. So it's moved into high gear, and I would say it's too early to tell.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Johnson, just briefly, in my home state, we suffered flooding just this month. In North Carolina, you really took it on the chin. You talked in your testimony about improvements, enhancements in the way in which we design our highways from a resiliency standpoint. Is a stretch of highway constructed today materially different in its environmental resiliency than it was 25 years ago?
In my opinion, it's not substantially different from it was 25 years ago.
All right. I didn't know if there was some secret sauce that we hadn't figured out at NDOT as we're building stretches of highway that are susceptible to flooding. So,
No.
not so. All right. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Figures.
Thank you, Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Holmes, so I know it's not with us, but thank you guys for pulling this hearing together. I represent Alabama, part of Alabama, Mobile up to Montgomery and kind of everything between Mississippi and Georgia. So a lot of rural areas are part of the makeup of my district, and in being in a rural district like many of my colleagues here, we rely heavily on long stretches of federal highways to move freight, access essential services. This is only going to be amplified, particularly in the Mobile area, but also regionally with the expansion of the port in Mobile, which come about 60 days or so, give or take, will be the deepest port in the Gulf of Mexico. And so we expect the freight that comes through the Gulf, through the port of Mobile, to expand greatly, exponentially. And so it's very critical that we are focusing on trying to secure the type of sustained infrastructure investment that we struggle year over year to do. Mr. Johnson, I want to start with you because you had a colleague here at one of our last hearings, Janet Kavanoki from Vulcan, headquartered in Alabama, not quite in my district, but up in Birmingham. And she testified earlier about the importance of the Highway Trust Fund. Can you give me a little more detail on what the asphalt industry, as a whole can do to extend the Highway Trust Fund dollars?
The asphalt industry, like as stated, And a couple other questions. We constantly are trying to improve our cost structure, trying to make asphalt as cheap as possible, make it as quality as long life as possible. Constantly trying to find ways to be innovative and through different design methods and using recycled materials to make those dollars go as far as possible.
Gotcha. And Mr. Davis, from your perspective, does the Highway Trust Fund, in its current status, does it sufficiently account for the infrastructure needs in low income and low population, rather, in rural communities across the country?
At present, it's not satisfying all the needs anywhere, because even though the spending has crept up substantially in the last couple of years, cost inflation on materials and labor has crept up even higher. So it's not getting the job done in rural areas, but that's not to say that rural areas are being disproportionately discriminated against with funding. Things are rough everywhere.
Yeah, and do you have any particular ideas that this committee should keep in mind to make sure that, because as I see it and throughout my lifetime, coming from Alabama, you have your main cities in Alabama, which for the most part, they're located right on main interstates, as they are everywhere, Mobile, Montgomery, Birmingham, Huntsville. But then you get to these long stretches in between those cities, and those are often the forgotten territories in terms of investments, infrastructure, and otherwise. But do you have any specific ideas that we can do to keep in mind to make sure that we are continuing to flow those investments, the Highway Trust Fund investments, to those rural and lower population communities?
In this case, it kind of begins and ends with the state DOT, because the federal government doesn't particularly prescribe the degree to which the dollars given to the states have to be spent urban versus rural. I believe 55-60% of one program gets suballocated by population, and but that doesn't really account for the vast majority of the spending. So and Congress has traditionally been hesitant to force more urban versus rural highway decisions on states, preferring to let them make those minds up themselves.
Yeah, and this is, that's for anyone who wants to chime in on it. But we've talked about the need for the balance between EVs and the emerging EVs on the road to contribute to the Highway Trust Fund. How do you guys suggest that we go about doing that in a more efficient way, given how they are charged, like how they receive their fuel? I guess we'll start right here with you, Mr. Braceras.
Congressman, was the question, how would we start to implement an EV charge?
No, how will we start? How do you guys suggest that we go about collecting?
That is, I think, that is the big question for a road usage charge. I think the way to do this is through the telematics in the vehicles. So we've got about 50-50 of our customers right now are either choosing to do an odometer read and send that picture of the odometer read to us, or we have agreements with the OEMs, the car companies, and they will then give us just that mileage that car is driven within our state. That is the most cost-effective way we've found, because we've done these plugins into the OB2 port, and that is more expensive. And so I'm pretty sure the phone companies figured out how to charge a lot of people. We could probably figure out how to charge a lot of people as well.
All right. Well, thank you guys for your time and patience. And I yield back.
Mr. McDowell, you're up if you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. The funding mechanism of the Highway Trust Fund was designed to set up a self-replenishing source of funding for infrastructure projects, but for nearly 2 decades, the fund has been sustained through transfers from the general fund of the Treasury. The Congressional Budget Office's most recent projections show that once the current surface transportation bill expires, the Highway Trust Fund will have a $142 billion shortfall over the next 5 years. The funding structure established in the 1950s simply does not work in the 21st century. We have all seen the increasing number of hybrid and fully electric vehicles on the road, especially over the past few years. I'm all for consumer choice, but EV owners have been reaping the benefits of the highway system without contributing their fair share for long enough. Despite making up a growing proportion of cars on the road, EVs avoid paying the user fees that other vehicle owners pay in the form of fuel taxes, all while causing way more wear and tear on road surfaces. According to the Department of Transportation's own data, EV batteries are heavier, sometimes up to 50% heavier than the traditional internal combustion engines that they are replacing. The cost and frequency of road repairs is increasing, and we must consider ways that all road users can be a part of the solution. Simply put, EVs cannot continue to get a free ride. As the witnesses today have already attested to, the stability of the Highway Trust Fund impacts each state's ability to prioritize roadway improvements, which are vital to keeping drivers safe on the roads we all use. North Carolina is a prime example of a state that stands to lose a lot if Congress does not act to fix this funding shortfall. Our state's population is growing, resulting in more drivers on the roads. This growth, coupled with the increased costs of construction due to inflation brought on by the previous administration, will continue to raise both the cost and frequency of highway repairs. When viewed through this lens, adding hurricane damage into the mix is like throwing lighter fluid on a fire. As a proud congressman from the state of North Carolina, I'm going to ensure that my state has the resources it needs to tackle these safety challenges head on. I want to thank the witnesses for being here to testify today before this subcommittee, and I look forward to the discussion today. Mr. Johnson, I appreciate you being here, and for those that may not know, the company, Fred Smith Company, has been operating and growing in North Carolina for nearly 100 years. Has over 1,200 employees across my home state. There's even a couple of Smiths that live in my district. But today, you're representing the asphalt pavement industry, which has operations in every state across the country. And in fact, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics at DOT estimates that 1/10 of our nation's workforce is directly employed by transportation-related industries. So the value of your perspective and the work that this committee accomplishes has a significant impact on your business plans. With that in mind, does the Highway Trust Fund solvency help with your company's projections regarding what projects you bid on or for a slate of work during a given paving season?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. So our state DOT does a really good job projecting out projects that they have in their plans, and we count on those for our planning and our future investments. And when we see those jobs sliding because of funding, lack of funding, then we are hesitant to pull the trigger on making additional investments in our company, in our asphalt plants, and in hiring more employees and training our employees for future positions due to growth. So without that consistent funding, it definitely makes us question and not pull the trigger on certain investments.
Gotcha. As you mentioned in your testimony, North Carolina ranks second in the nation for the number of state-maintained roads with more than 80,000 miles of highway and over 13,500 bridges. Could you briefly describe the importance that HTF funding has across our state alone, and how do variables such as hurricane damage or projected population growth magnify the scope of that impact?
So the HTF funds about 25% of our total roadway program in the state, which is very significant. We perform a lot of projects for Fred Smith Company and others across the state that would not happen without the HTF. And as you mentioned, the hurricane, we met with the state DOT last week, and they're anticipating a $5 billion cost to repair Hurricane Helene. And we are looking at some serious deficits in the state funding due to that. So the FHWA has been working very well with the state DOT to reimburse those funds. So we appreciate that, but it's a big mountain to climb.
Sure thing. Thank you, sir. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman Rouser and Ranking Member Norton, for holding this hearing today. Excuse me. Thank you to our witnesses for their time and testimony. I know it's a big sacrifice to be here, and we appreciate you all very much. I represent a very rural part of Ohio. It's a place where we have 4 of the 5 poorest counties and 9 of the 20 poorest counties in the state of Ohio. So I'd like to focus for a minute on the selling points we've had for VMT. Mr. Burkhardt, what, the only basis for VMT being sold for as a benefit to rural communities today that I've heard is that their cars get worse mileage. Are there others? Just so I'm clear.
Are you asking if there's other sources other than?
When somebody else asked you how it was cheaper for rural communities to have VMT, and you just said gas mileage. Is there any other?
Yes. There was studies done through the TETC, which is the Eastern Transportation Coalition, I-95 corridor, and they did studies with Georgia and Maryland and determined that rural participants ended up paying anywhere from 7% to 9% less than they would have paid with a fuel tax.
Okay, this is from a study done where? I'm sorry.
This is through the TETC, which is the Eastern Transportation Coalition, which, among other things, supports mileage-based user fee studies with several of its member states. And this was a study that was done through that program.
So they said they paid less, but were there reasons other than the fact that their cars are getting worse mileage, or just that's the percentage that came out of that?
Yes, sir. Mostly it was due to the fact that their vehicles were lower gas mileage. So the idea of mileage-based user fee is that everyone pays the same amount per mile, and as it is now, people are unfairly burdened with when they have vehicles that have lower gas mileage, and that tends to be
Okay, so what I'm hearing is no other reason besides their cars get worse mileage. Mr. Davis, do you know of any other reason that it's supposed to benefit rural communities other than their cars get worse mileage?
No. Generally speaking, VMT is traditionally a little higher in rural areas than urban, although the growth lately has been more in urban than rural.
Do you know does anyone know, either of you two know what the baseline miles per gallon they use for urban and rural areas, or urban and suburban areas versus rural areas, or did they just test a few cars, or anybody know the methodology? Because it really doesn't make a lot of sense to me that, say you get 28 miles per gallon on driving in a suburban area, or I would think you would get less than that in an urban area because you're sitting at stoplights all the time. And say you get roughly 20 in a rural area, that's 18%
it's 23, but we can get back to you on that.
23 for?
23 miles per gallon.
Which for rural or for non-rural?
For rural.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes it even better for the rural folks. So say you're averaging 28 in non-rural areas, it's like now it's going to be probably a 12 or 13% difference in mileage, and in my district probably a 200% difference in miles driven. That's not really sustainable. It doesn't make sense to me that would save the people in my district money. I mean, am I explaining myself to where it makes sense? Okay. And again, there's no other basis for it. Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Before I served in Congress, I owned a ready-mix concrete business. I'll echo some Congressman Collins' comments from earlier, but I know the planning and work that goes into carrying out infrastructure projects. Mr. Johnson, how is the projected shortfall in the Highway Trust Fund impacting the asphalt pavement industry regarding project timelines, workforce stability, and project planning? You only have 30 seconds, but if you want to hit the highlights and you want to add stuff later, you can submit it.
Okay. Yeah, of course. So the shortfall is, slowed down projects. It's slowed down projects. It has slowed down our growth. It has made the environment much more competitive, and it's delaying projects, which is impacting our entire industry significantly.
Thank you, everybody, and I yield back, Chairman.
Mr. Kennedy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful for this important hearing being convened. Our nation's infrastructure is the backbone of economic opportunity, public safety, and quality of life. For decades, the Highway Trust Fund has played a role in building and maintaining that backbone, yet today we face a stark reality. The trust fund is on an unsustainable path, threatening the ability of states and localities to plan and deliver critical projects. We must work together to create a durable path forward that restores certainty, empowers innovation for states, and meets the needs of a growing and dynamic America. Mr. Braceras, as a friend from Utah, I've known for many years, as we talked about at the earlier part, I'll ask you a series of questions if that's all right. We both know Utah has been a national leader in piloting road usage charge programs. Can you speak to the lessons learned from Utah's experience with RUC programs and how it could translate to sustainable transportation funding efforts nationally?
Yes. Thank you, Congressman, for that question. I thought you had been promoted there for a minute, but that was quick.
For a minute, yes.
So going back to probably 2003, 2004, that's when our legislature kind of looked at transportation funding across the board and determined that we're not going down a sustainable path. And that's where the road usage charge program came from. So I would say a lesson learned for us in this is you have to lead with your policy principles. You can't just jump into a program and say this mathematically makes sense. You have to lead with a policy principle. So we focus on protecting people's privacy. We don't use the word, we're going to track you. That's not what anyone wants. And so we think that through. One of the questions that Congressman Taylor asked earlier about benefits to rural citizens, one of the things that we found where the Farm Bureau was part of our convening board and coming up with the policies was we wouldn't charge if you're not on a public road. So rural users spend more time on non-public roads than urban users. And so by having the ability to not charge for when you're on private roads, that was a benefit that the rural community found in this. Now, I don't see the road usage charge being as this panacea that's going to solve the problem. And we look at this as it's a combination of multiple revenue sources. So as we start to see more vehicles participating in a road usage charge program, we're trying to see, imagine that matching up with the decline in the purchasing power of the fuel tax. So we, in Utah, we not only increased the 5-cent gas tax increase in 2015, but we also indexed it. And we've indexed that to CPI. And so every year that's adjusted to CPI. Every year we're seeing road usage charge coming in. And we also bring in general fund monies to do our capacity projects. So basically fuel tax, both federal and state, is being used, the user fees is being used to operate and maintain the roadways, that day-to-day activities. And the capital expansion is coming from our statewide sales tax, of which by statute, it's earmarked at 27.5% of the general fund is going to just capacity projects. And so we found that it's going to take several revenue sources to be able to solve because there's so much need out there.
Thank you for that answer. I'll add the idea that comes to me is that's important, and we've worked on these things. You know that I'm a healthcare, I've been in healthcare my whole career, and the Medicaid parameters around a federal-state partnership. I'm interested in your thoughts. If we go 50 years in the future, as the decades unfold, what role do you see states playing in collaboration with the federal government over the next 50 years in regards to funding, maintaining, building these roads, bridges, and other infrastructure that we need?
I think that's one of the successes that we have in this country. It's the federal, state, local partnerships. The projects are picked through a collaboration with local governments and the state government, but it's a state-administered, federally assisted program. We can't do this without the federal government because this is a national transportation system that every state depends on. Our economy, our security depends on this. And so what I see going forward is I anticipate we're going to see much greater dependence on road usage charging for that operation and maintenance piece. But I believe as a country, we still need to make a commitment that we're going to continue to build new projects, new transit projects, new road projects, because that's going to be what's going to generate the economic growth in our country.
Thank you for that statement, and I'll finish just by saying that there's a great deal of red tape and difficulty that we put on ourselves through federal oversight and regulatory burden, and I, along with many others, are interested in reducing and eliminating, when necessary, those regulatory frameworks that actually are non-functional for us. With that, Mr. Chair, thank you for the time to ask these questions. Thank you to the witnesses for their willingness to be here and take their time with us, and I yield back.
Mr. Cowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Underlying today's discussion about how we can shore up the Highway Trust Fund has been sort of an implicit premise, or at least sometimes this premise is there, that the more we spend, the better our roads are going to be, the better our transportation infrastructure is going to be. But that premise is not necessarily true. Most obviously, when you just look at the fact that inflation has caused the cost of building to go up so much in recent years that I think it's something like 40% reduction in the purchasing power under the Infrastructure Act since it passed. But another example of that would be my own state of California, which has the highest gas tax of any state in the country, yet has among the worst roads. And our taxpayers seem to pay more and more while the potholes get deeper and deeper. And so, Mr. Braceras, you seem to have had some success in Utah in terms of actually getting a better return on your investment. So would you have any advice to us in California as to how we can do better? And maybe, Mr. Johnson, if you also wanted to weigh in on this broader question of how, apart from the question of how we shore up the trust fund, how do we actually get more of a return on the funds we're investing?
Thank you for that question. So I think one of the ways to get more return on the investment is the predictability of the funding. We can be more strategic. We apply a asset management, every state DOT asset management business approach to try to determine which project to do and at what time. If you can do the right project at the right time, you can get better outcomes. And so that predictability, knowing that you're going to have X amount of money coming in every year, allows you, and recognize that pavement conditions, bridge conditions, especially in a large state like yours, take a long-term commitment. You need to look at trends. So what we did is in mid-2000s, we realized at that time we didn't have enough money to maintain all of our roads at the same standard that we felt we needed to. So we stopped maintaining what we called low-volume roads. We did reactive maintenance is all we did. And we showed our legislature every year that we predict with this investment, this is going to be the pavement condition, the trends that you're going to see. And then we told them that with a 5-cent gas tax, we could turn that condition around and start to improve it. And we've been able to do that with performance measures. So I think holding states and local governments accountable for outcomes, give them the flexibility to figure out how to do it, what projects to do it with, but hold them accountable for outcomes and realize that these investments in infrastructure, you have to look at trends that take a long time to turn a very large ship.
So sorry, what does that accountability look like with the performance measures?
I'm sorry?
What does the accountability look like with those performance measures?
So for us in Utah, in this one case, we were looking at pavement condition. And so we were using the performance measure that the public sees, the seat of their pants. We call it IRI, International Roughness Index. But what we were actually using with the engineers in the back room was overall condition index, looking at all the distresses within the pavement system. And we were using that asset management approach to predict with different investment levels what that outcome would look like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you said, but the accountability part is if the locality doesn't meet that standard, what happens then?
Yeah, so I don't get taken to the woodshed. I'd probably get fired. But for my legislature, every year we're reporting how we're doing with that investment. So reporting on safety, pavement condition, bridge condition, and it's in mobility. We're looking at delays. All of those things take place almost on a monthly basis with my legislature. And that's really, I think, the accountability process, where they're making sure we're investing all the dollars, the state dollars and the federal dollars, to get the best outcomes.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And Mr. Johnson, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Sure, yeah, I agree with Mr. Braceras. It definitely falls on the state DOTs, and they need predictable funding so that they can plan the maintenance operations and they can prioritize which projects are most important so they can get them on the schedule and they can hold those schedules, because delaying schedules does nothing but make congestion worse and the costs go up.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Owens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Rouser and Ranking Member Joe Norton. And our witnesses today for joining us. For nearly 70 years, the Highway Trust Fund has connected our communities and facilitated the interstate commerce that's made America the economic envy of the world. However, for too long, we've kicked this Highway Trust Fund solvency down the road, as it is a problem that will not go away, and it hasn't. In Utah's 4th District, one of the fastest-growing regions in the country, infrastructure projects are meticulously studied, planned, and executed, sometimes decades in advance. To support these projects and other across the country, this community must pursue predictable, reliable, and fiscally responsible solutions that empower states and support innovation. Mr. Baracus, It's an honor again to host you today. Your presence today reflects your outstanding leadership at UDOT and Utah's role as the national leader in innovation and infrastructure solutions. Could you please share with the committee what actions the state of Utah has taken to shore up its transportation funding over the past years, particularly as the state's population has grown?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. So in the state of Utah, we rely heavily on the federal program. It makes up just under 18% of our total funding for a $2.5 billion budget is what we manage in the state of Utah. So we're, compared to a lot of states, we're a relatively small state by population. We're a large geographic state, but we're a very urban state as well. And so what the federal program is critical. We use that mostly, almost exclusively, to take care of our pavements and our bridges, our federal program. And then we use the state's gas tax money to operate the system and also do things like install traffic signals, turn lanes, passing lanes, those type, I'll call them operational fixes. And then we use the state general sales tax, 27.5% of the statewide general sales tax, where the legislature has determined there's a nexus. So we've been talking a lot about user fees here. The legislature determined there's a nexus between the vehicle sales of vehicles and vehicle-related services, and that was the nexus that they used to establish the percentage. And that percentage is used for capacity projects, and we use it for highway capacity projects, as well as transit capacity projects, as well as active transportation projects that we're doing around the state. And so that's kind of the funding. We also have aviation, rural transit program, and other funding pieces, but that's the major solutions that our legislature has determined, because if we're going to continue to grow, transportation is one of those foundational elements to our quality of life and our economy.
Okay. And could you also please outline what would mean for the state of Utah if the Congress does not address the long-term solvency of the Highway Trust Fund?
Yes, sorry, sir. Was it, how would we propose addressing?
Yeah, if we don't, what would it mean to our state if the Congress does not address this long-term solvency problem?
Yeah, thank you for that. So every state develops what we call a 5-year STIP, Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. And so here, the IIJA is about to expire here in September of '26. We all are making decisions because we have 5 years of projects because we have to get the projects ready to go. We're all making guesses of what Congress is going to do in terms of what your funding level is going to be. I have chosen to be conservative, and I've programmed flat. So I've taken the last year of funding for IIJA, and I'm assuming we're going to at least have a flat budget, because basically the STIP is a commitment of projects. It's a promise that I'm making to our citizens that we're going to deliver those projects. So if Congress, brings more money in, I'm going to scramble to find the projects to fill that up. If Congress does not fund it at that last level, then we're going to be cutting projects. We don't cut them, we push them back. We delay those projects. And so that's why it's critical. If we want to deliver projects on time at the best cost and get the best outcomes, we need to have that predictability. And I would suggest that funding the formula programs provide the states the best predictability to be able to get projects out. So our partners, the contractors, the consultants, they need to plan. They need to have predictability to make the investments they need to deliver the projects that we ask them to do.
Well, thank you. I just want to kind of wrap up by saying I've made the point as often as I can that Utah should be the model. We innovate, we grow, we collaborate like no other state in the union. So I hope they take my advice and use Utah as that example. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Are you back?
Gentleman yields back. Are there any other questions from members who have not yet had the opportunity to ask? I don't see any. And therefore, I want to thank our witnesses. I appreciate your testimony today. Very helpful, very instructive. A lot of good dialogue here that will be very helpful as we move forward. So with that, subcommittee stands adjourned.